The International Trade Center empowers people to improve their livelihoods through trade. ITC is the joint agency of the United Nations and the World Trade Organization. It's a one-stop shop for small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs, looking to connect to international markets.
Trading in global markets helps people in developing countries move out of subsistence activities into more productive work.
Most jobs in the world are created by SMEs. When they become more productive and do business internationally, people at all levels benefit, resulting in inclusive growth. The problem is, it's not easy for SMEs in developing countries to connect to foreign markets. That's where ITC comes in.
Our free online tools help SMEs find potential customers and understand market requirements.
We support governments in crafting export strategies to diversify their economies, produce more value-added goods and services, and create jobs.
We help developing countries understand WTO rules, including the Trade Facilitation Agreement, where we are paving the way for notification, ratification, and implementation.
The goal is to make trade faster and cheaper, especially for SMEs.
We train trade and investment support institutions to do more to help their SME clients access foreign markets and investment. And by sharing SMEs' concerns with governments, these institutions ensure that policymakers understand the private sector's needs. Our SME Trade Academy provides online courses for businesses, policymakers, and others to understand trade issues and overcome market constraints.
Big opportunities await SMEs that are ready to tap into international value chains. ITC works with SMEs to become more competitive by improving supply chain management, product quality, and marketing. We also facilitate contacts with potential buyers.
As emerging economies grow into important markets, ITC is working with governments and business to maximize the development benefits of regional integration and promote South-South trade and investment.
Economic opportunities for women and young entrepreneurs lead to healthier, better educated societies and a more prosperous future for all. ITC helps them connect to foreign markets. Trade can also provide incentives to protect biodiversity and preserve traditional knowledge.
Looking to the future, ITC's focus will be on the global goals for sustainable development, to eradicate poverty, protect the environment, and expand opportunities for all, to create trade impact for good.
Welcome everybody to the first ever Good Trade Summit, which is 100% virtual. We're really happy that all of you are joining us here today. And even though it's virtual, we want to make it as participatory as possible. So for the first time ever, we at the International Trade Center are pleased to bring you a combination of two of our flagship events, SheTrades Global, which is all about economically empowering women, and the Trade for Sustainable Development Forum, which is about making sustainable green trade a reality on the ground. My name is Susanna Pak, and I have the pleasure of being your MC over the next 2 days of this summit. We have a great lineup for you. Let me give you a few examples of the speakers who will be joining us these next 2 days. We have explorer Bertrand Piccard, who has flown around the world not once, but twice, first in a balloon and second time in a solar-powered plane without any fuel. We also have the honor of having the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, Ms. Amina Mohammed, joining us, as well as former Liberian President and Nobel Laureate, Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. So we have a great lineup for you. Keep with us for the next 2 days. And before we dive in, a few housekeeping rules for you. We want to make this interactive, as we said, and you're watching us on the Brella platform, which enables this. If you can, try to watch this on Google Chrome because you'll have the best experience and you'll get the full use of the Q&A function. For the Q&A function, just make sure that you list the name of the speaker you have a question for and your question, and we'll use those in the panels that are upcoming. We also have really interesting features. In the left-hand column, you'll see people. If you click on people, you'll see all the different people who are signed up to the event, both speakers and participants. You can request 15-minute networking sessions. So for later today, we'll give you a networking break where you can do this. And tomorrow, you'll also have the opportunity to make use of this function. Also check out exhibitors in that same column because there are more than 30 entrepreneurs from around the world who are showcasing their goods and services over the next 2 days. And we also have a more section in the left-hand column where you can learn how to actually use this platform, Brella. It's just a 2-minute video You'll get the full information on that. And of course, if you are joining us on social media, please tweet throughout the event. You can tag ITC at ITC News and also use hashtag GoodTradeSummit. We're very excited to next hear from our new Executive Director, Ms. Pamela Coke-Hamilton. But first, let's hear what our colleagues from around the world have to say what good trade means to them, from Vietnam to Nepal to Peru and more.
To me, good trade means equal market opportunities that emphasize on reuse and recycle for sustainable environment.
In my view, good trade is fair price for farmers and equal opportunities to everyone.
Buen comercio es origen, trazabilidad, oportunidad, sustentabilidad, es trascender.
Poner en valor y en equilibrio personas, campo y clientes.
So good trade means going green and sustainability.
It enables us to better deliver on our products.
It provides better market access and fair includes to our products.
Protect farmland.
Good trade looks beyond the business's profits.
Good trade leads to exchange of skills and knowledge.
El buen comercio valora y recompensa debidamente el trabajo de las mujeres.
El buen comercio no promueve la corrupción.
It does not promote corruption.
It means equal pay and job opportunity.
Good trade means doing business with love.
Your Excellencies, dear colleagues and partners, welcome to the first ITC Good Trade Summit. Not only is this the inaugural year of the Good Trade Summit, it is also the first ITC event that I have hosted as Executive Director since taking up this role on 1st October. To have my first ITC engagement be one centered around inclusive and sustainable trade and supporting greater gender equity and equality in trade is a testament to the importance I accord to this issue as we build back better. To kick off this innovative session and this occasion, I would like to say a few words on the theme, Engaging Stronger from the COVID-19 crisis. Since early this year, we have witnessed unprecedented challenges arising from the ongoing global pandemic. Several crises are running concurrently. Firstly, a health crisis. Secondly, an economic crisis. And thirdly, a crisis of multilateralism, all with devastating effects on micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, as well as vulnerable populations throughout the world, but with disproportionately harmful effects in developing countries. Yet, while recognizing the challenges we face, my message is that we can chart a path forward and a brighter future to emerge stronger than we were before. Over the next 2 days, this summit will serve as an opportunity to highlight achievements, engage leaders, and work together on practical solutions to build back boldly. And I want to add an addendum to this building back boldly. We know that it's been agreed that we need to build back better, but building back boldly also says that we want to be innovative, we want to create new options, we want to think outside the box, and we want to move on to new issues and areas that need to be addressed in the context of fixing the global situation. We need to pursue action that leverages our most innovative ideas to benefit the environment, economies, and workers in more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable value chains. We need to make sure women and girls are empowered to lead and thrive in their work. We need to implement the policies and goals outlined in the Paris Agreement, Beijing +25, and the Sustainable Development Goals. In short, we need to make good trade a part of our response to the challenges of the post-COVID age. These unprecedented circumstances have revealed the ever-growing need for collaboration on multiple trade and development challenges. The Good Trade Summit is itself a marriage of two regular ITC events. We have integrated SheTrades Global, which is the premier global event linking women entrepreneurs with buyers and partners, with the Trade for Sustainable Development Forum, one of the leading global events on sustainable value chains for critical discussions on the way forward together. This is especially pertinent considering the uneven impact of the COVID-19 crisis. Although we are all affected by the pandemic does not affect all equally. The 2020 ITC SME Competitiveness Outlook, the SMECO report, shows that firms in developing countries will be impacted most, especially in the least developed countries and small island developing states. Moreover, MSMEs, women entrepreneurs, and other vulnerable groups face additional and unique challenges that are only exacerbated by the ongoing crisis. The fact is that despite the lack of recognition, small businesses account for roughly 70% of jobs and half of economic activity worldwide. Assisting these businesses is critical, not just for economic development, but for driving a more green and sustainable recovery. Targeted support can ensure rapid growth in implementing green solutions while addressing many of the long-term issues regarding climate change and human development. In the same vein, women-owned businesses and women workers in general represent some of the most productive yet most underutilized and disadvantaged economic actors. ITC research shows that 64% of women-led firms, compared with 52% of men-led firms, have been strongly impacted by the crisis. To create the world we want and meet the need for a sustainable and robust economic recovery, we must target assistance to women. The entrepreneurs, business leaders, country representatives, and international speakers you will hear from over the next 2 days will discuss pragmatic and replicable solutions. These range from business practices to guarantee resource efficiency and climate resiliency, to mechanisms designed to ensure decent working conditions and equal opportunities for women. We have brought together a truly extraordinary group of change makers to brainstorm the next steps in an extraordinary global situation, from forward-looking CEOs to daring explorers. In addition, I especially want to highlight the women leaders and champions participating in the summit, such as Inger Andersen, the Executive Director of the United Nations Environment Program, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, the Nobel Laureate and former President of Liberia, and Amina J. Mohammed, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations. With that, I am happy to turn it over to Deputy Secretary General Mohammed herself, who will deliver an important statement to inaugurate the Good Trade Summit. Thank you very much.
Your Excellencies, dear partners and colleagues, I'm delighted to greet the International Trade Centre's first Good Trade Summit. The COVID-19 pandemic has sent shockwaves across the world, and global trade has been among the casualties. The lockdown has strained the value chains that bind our world, and micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises in developing countries, many run by women, are bearing the brunt. 1 in 5 fear that they will shut down forever within 3 months, but a tremendous opportunity lies behind this hardship. We have a chance to build a new economy that mitigates, not hastens, the effects of climate change. We have an opening to lift up women who are more likely to work in hard-hit sectors such as tourism and hospitality. We have the prospect of reinvigorating globalization so that it creates positive and inclusive economic, social, and environmental impact. We can, in short, get on track towards achieving the SDGs and making the Paris Agreement a reality. Putting in practice the notion of good trade as inclusive and sustainable trade to support the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030 is key to emerge stronger from the COVID-19 crisis. That is why the Good Trade Summit is so timely. I commend the International Trade Centre for bringing together policymakers and practitioners, entrepreneurs and experts, and a wide range of stakeholders from the trade and inclusive development community. I encourage you to examine new ways to build meaningful value chains and move toward a just, inclusive, and sustainable recovery. As we pursue this path, let's preserve the progress we've made in gender equality. Let's share information and harness the power of partnership. And as the United Nations marks its 75th anniversary, let us reanimate the spirit of multilateralism that has served us so well in troubled times before. Thank you for your engagement, and I wish you all success in your important deliberations. Thank you.
I'm delighted to now introduce you to Inger Andersen, Executive Director of the United United Nations Environmental Program, who joins us today with a special message from Nairobi.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at the Good Trade Summit. First, my congratulations to Pamela Cook-Hamilton on her appointment. We at UNEP greatly look forward to deepening the collaboration with ITC on issues of sustainable trade and sustainable production and consumption. Quite simply put, good trade is trade that contributes positively to addressing the three planetary crises: the climate crisis, the nature crisis, and the pollution and waste crisis. It creates resilience to environmental shocks, stimulates green innovation, creates jobs, and promotes the just transition that is so central to achieving the SDGs. Good trade that moves us towards net zero carbon emissions and helps us tackle the climate emergency. As we seek to reboot the global economy following the tragedy of COVID-19, we have a new opportunity to trade differently, stimulating trade that is greener and more sustainable. Greener trade requires investments and finance in sustainable industries, production, and exports. Trade can build that vital link between those who want to produce sustainably and those who want to consume sustainably. With good governance systems and collaboration between governments, industry, and consumers, we can achieve that. Equally important is to build greater coherence between development assistance, climate finance, and aid for trade. Here we have untapped opportunities to direct trade-related assistance towards renewable energy projects, low-carbon transportation systems, and sustainable agriculture, all areas we already know are critical for countries to achieve their SDGs. As we seek to recover better, we need to harness trade policies to support and incentivize businesses, large and small, in developed and developing economies, to focus on more environmentally sustainable and more inclusive production and trade. Promoting green exports of commodities and products will simultaneously support the recovery and action on climate and nature. It will help SMEs in developing countries benefit from arising business opportunities and support economic diversification. And finally, policy and trade arrangements must safeguard environmental policy, strengthen environmental commitments, and not undermine the multilateral environmental agreements that so many countries have signed on to. I've spoken frequently in the last few months about how stimulus packages must have green strings attached. COVID-19 recovery can lead to greener and more sustainable outcomes, and trade is a key instrument in making this happen. So let's begin the work. Let's begin it now. I thank you.
My warmest thanks to Ms. Andersen for her very inspiring message. We look forward to deepening our collaboration with UNEP and working together towards greener and more sustainable trade that stimulates green innovation and moves us to net zero climate emissions. And as we speak of green innovation, I'm now delighted to introduce Dr. Bertrand Piccard, who will be interviewed by our very own Vanessa Erogbogbo, Chief of the ITC Sustainable and Inclusive Value Chain section, right after a short transition. Thank you very much.
Hello to everybody. Very nice to be with you now.
Thank you very much, Pamela, our brand new Executive Director at the International Trade Center, who we are so excited to have here at ITC with us. And good afternoon to all of you. I'm delighted to host Dr. Bertrand Piccard for this high-level interview at the Good Trade Summit this afternoon. I don't usually do biographies, but I'm going to ask you to allow me the exception today. Dr. Piccard is a trained psychiatrist, he's a pioneer, he's a visionary with an indomitable spirit for adventure. He's the founder of the Solar Impulse Foundation, and he's also a United Nations Goodwill Ambassador. Since 2002, he's been promoting clean technologies and energy efficiency as financially profitable solutions to fight one of the defining issues of our time, climate change. He made history by accomplishing the first ever non-stop around the world balloon flight with just jet streams to transport him over 45,000 kilometers. And then with his team, he circumnavigated the globe in an airplane, the Solar Impulse, tracking another 40,000 kilometers powered only by the sun. And through these astonishing feats, he's really demonstrating the limitless possibilities when humans push the boundaries of the impossible. And he's doing this to drive action from governments and industry to bridge the gap between economy and ecology. So we're going to start with some opening remarks from Dr. Piccard before the interview. And without further ado, Bertrand, welcome to the Good Trade Summit. Over to you.
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction. And I think you understood very well that the trip around the world with Solar Impulse airplane was a symbol. It was a way to promote the incredible potential of clean technologies, renewable energy, to show that they can achieve so-called impossible goals, and everything that we can do in the sky where it's the most difficult to do it, of course, we can do on the ground. But when we speak of doing it on the ground in a much more down-to-earth, practical way, we have to see the obstacles and the opportunities. And we have to understand the context in which we stand that prevents us to be efficient, to be clean, to have a system basically that is sustainable. Because it's very clear that the world we had before the COVID crisis was not sustainable. It was polluting, it was fragile, just a virus destroyed it. It was unfair. There are far too many inequalities everywhere in the world. It was dangerous for a lot of people. So today we are at the beginning of something new, hopefully something new, because there are some people who desperately try to recover what we lost and to put us back in the problems we had before the crisis. But if we consider the way of doing something new, what are the forces in presence? What are the opportunities and the threats? And I think we have to understand something is that we are today in a dilemma. We have two main streams that are contradictory. One of these streams, led by some ecological parties, are promoting degrowth. They are fighting against growth, fighting against the economy, fighting to have less mobility, less comfort, less trade, less consumption. And this will lead to a social chaos. We see it very well with what happened during the lockdown. If you have an economic degrowth, you have thousands of companies who go bankrupt, and you have millions of people who are unemployed. So trying to solve the environmental issues by fighting against growth, for me, leads to social chaos. But at the same time, continuing with this so-called unlimited growth leads to an environmental disaster. And it's absolutely clear that we cannot continue like this, because maybe on the short term, it will allow some people to make more money. But even in 5 to 10 years, we will have so many constraints, so many natural catastrophes, disasters, so many climate refugees, so many tropical diseases invading Europe and United States and Northern China and Russia and so on, that it will not work. So if both streams don't work, what can we do? And I think this is the moment where we have to speak about qualitative growth. Qualitative growth means that we find a system in which we create jobs, we generate profit by replacing what is polluting by what is protecting the environment. And this is currently the market of the century, because our world has been growing on inefficient devices. we are wasting between 1/2 and 3/4 of the energy that is produced. We are wasting half of the food that is produced, half of the natural resources. And I would say that even 95% of the wastes are wasted because they can be in resource and we just throw them away. So when we speak about a green recovery, I think we should speak about an efficient recovery, because it's the market of the century to replace combustion engines, which are completely inefficient, to insulate buildings, to put heat pumps instead of radiators or fuel heaters, to introduce new industrial processes, to stop burning fuel, to produce electricity, heat, or movements, because now the renewable energies start to be much cheaper in most of the parts of the world, much cheaper than gas, oil, or coal. So we have the technologies available. We have these technologies available. And this is something that people have to understand. Today, renewable energies are cheaper than fossil energy in half of the world. Today, the systems to be more energy efficient are so profitable because the energy saving you do will pay back for the investment. You have electric mobility, you have hydrogen trucks or hydrogen trains. All this is available. New industrial processes. How are we going to put them into place? I believe there are two very important factors to help. One is trade, the other one is regulation. Why regulation? Because if we observe what is happening in the world today, it is legal to pollute. The regulation allows everyone to put as much CO2 as we want in the atmosphere, as many particles, smoke, toxical fumes, as much plastic in the ocean, as much chemicals in the soil, in the food, in the body of the people, and it is legal. Which means that a lot of companies, if we ask them to be cleaner and more efficient, will tell you, what I do is legal, why should I change? So you have pioneers in the industry, in the trade, business, everywhere, pioneers who are introducing changes, new technologies, they're becoming efficient, they are making coalitions, they're making resolutions, they are doing a fantastic job. But it's the minority. A lot of other people are resisting the force of inertia. You know, they just want to continue as long as they can what they have already done in the past, and they are surprised because they still have the same result than in the past and nothing new, which is, of course is normal. So we need regulations that will push the people who resist to adopt the new technologies that can be today available and profitable. So we need much tougher, much more ambitious energy standards, environmental policies, in order to reach targets that are really ambitious. And we can do it, fortunately, today in a profitable way because the technologies have evolved so much. The second thing is trade. What are the rules that we're going to set in trade in order to encourage efficiency and clean products, and to try to get rid of all these old systems and old devices that people are still using? So of course, we need to stimulate trade because it's a very important business and source of income in the world, but encourage and stimulate trade for the renewable energy, for the efficient goods, for the new clean technologies, new systems, new devices, and try to get rid of the others. So an organization like yours, an organization like WTO, all the people who deal with trade have to take their part of responsibility. And I think it's really important because basically what do we want? We want a filter that stops the old systems that are polluting and that are wasting money, not only energy, wasting money, and let go through the filter the goods that are efficient and that the world needs. Very often, you hear countries who say, oh, we cannot do that because the rules of free market oblige us to accept everything through the borders, which is wrong. It is wrong. The rules of trade force the countries to avoid any discrimination. It means that if you have a dirty product produced in-house, you are not allowed to ban the import of the same dirty product. But if you have some very high standards of efficiency, if you have a CO2 tax, or let's say a price on CO2, then you are allowed by all the rules of trade to stop at the border or to ask for a CO2 tax on all the goods that are imported if they are not corresponding to the standards that you have in the house, inside the country. This has to be known, and it has to be done much more, because if we continue to have some companies who are doing really good, or some countries who have regulation that tend to encourage efficient products, and you continue to have all these stranded goods that come from outside, it will kill the pioneers who try to do good. It will just kill them. So we need this filter. We need everyone to understand that the priority has to be given to everything that is at the same time profitable, sustainable, efficient, and environmental friendly. I could never have made this speech 10 years ago because all these products were too expensive. But today at the Solar Impulse Foundation, we are observing how many clean technologies start to be available. Our goal is to have 1,000 of them to really show to the entire world everything that is available to have a better future. And before we have 1,000, we have today 725. So it's 725 proves that protection of the environment is more profitable than the destruction of the environment. And a lot of these technologies come from startups, small companies, medium-sized companies. Some come from big multinational companies also. But what is interesting is that they cannot bloom because as long as the regulation is not encouraging them to have access to the market, they remain in research labs instead of coming to the market. So you have a big paradox. You have the population that is starting to demonstrate in favor of fighting climate change. You have the youth in the streets. You have climate strikes. The population would like to be cleaner and more efficient, but they don't find what they need to be cleaner and more efficient. All these products are not traded enough. They don't circulate enough. They are still blocked by the fact that nobody is imposing these new technologies on the market. So we see how interesting it is to include all the regulations, all the trading agreements into this vision of having a sustainable access to the profitable technologies that protect the environment already today. So this is what I wanted to tell you as my first remarks. And I think now there are a few questions and I'm very happy to answer them.
Thank you so much, Bertrand. I mean, you make such a convincing argument, and this is why we really wanted to hear from you this afternoon. And I think, you know, an organization like the International Trade Center, this is exactly what we're also trying to do, is to demonstrate the business case for moving to a cleaner economy and a more efficient economy. So I guess, you know, what struck me when you were speaking was this big paradox, because it seems almost obvious that, you know, with the increasing consumption and the increasing emissions, that we're going to, you know, we're going to need to change things. And it strikes me, you know, you pointed out the paradox of getting to commercialization and getting to diffusion of these technologies. And I wanted to maybe dig a bit deeper into what you're doing at the Solar Impulse Foundation to find out, how are you actually helping, first of all, some examples of some of the solutions that, you're seeing, where they're coming from, and how you're actually helping these solutions come to market, and what you think will be needed more to actually get them to be adopted, once they come to market.
Yes, I think it's a very, very important question. And what is missing today is the pull to the market. Because today governments are pushing startups, they are pushing innovation. They pay billions of dollars or euros to have innovation. And when there is a patent, very often it stops or it stays in the research labs because people are not obliged to use these new technologies. And as long as you are allowed to pollute, you are protected by the regulation and you say, I don't need to change anything. I give you an example. There is in the solutions that we have labeled at the Solar Impulse Foundation, a module for 500 euros that you can install on your thermal engine in your car, and it cuts 80% of the particles and reduces 20% of the fuel consumption. It means that in 6 months you pay back the investment just with the fuel saving. But as long as it is allowed to put 100% of particles and killing people with lung cancer or bronchitis, of course, nobody will change anything. But if you put the standard much tougher and you say, now in 5 years' time, we will accept only 20% of the particles emitted by the cars that are on the road today, then this module will be included in every car sold in the world. It will be job creating. It will be profit creating. It would reduce the budget of the public health because the air would be much cleaner in the cities, and you would be doing good everywhere. But first, we need this standard of pollution to be much tougher.
Yeah, and I guess what I'm taking from this is, it's about governments and policymakers figuring out how to address the short-term costs to the economic costs, and transition into the more efficient economy. So transitioning out of the old type of technologies and creating the jobs in the new types of technologies. Do you think how do you think the pandemic is going to, this crisis is going to affect the profitability of these new solutions? Do you think this is really an opportunity? Do you think, it will affect them positively or negatively?
It was difficult before the COVID crisis to build something new because there was already something existing. But today, a lot of the old industry collapsed. Travel industry, car industry, a lot of industrial production of goods and raw materials are down. So it's much easier now than before the crisis to build something new because we don't need to destroy something. It's been destroyed already. We can just now construct something that is better. And there are billions of dollars and euros flooding on the market for that. But of course, there must be conditions for the use of this money. Can you imagine how stupid it would be to put public money into car manufacturers that would make the same cars than before the crisis, same big polluting cars? Anyway, in 5 or 10 years, these combustion engines will be prohibited to enter in the cities, like it starts to be the case already now in some cities. So of course, this money has to be given to help the car manufacturers to make electric cars, to make small thermal engines that pollute less, to make hydrogen cars, but really to reorient completely the industry in a cleaner way. Same thing for aviation. France was very courageous. They told Air France, we give you public money, but we want you to be the cleanest company in 2035 with zero emission airplanes. That's ambitious, but only by being ambitious you can be successful.
Absolutely. I mean, I always say, half a century ago, we put a human being on the moon. So really, if we, with a bit of ambition, we can achieve so much. Finally, I wanted to just, check in with you on the jobs issue. And as a development agency, the International Trade Center, we always think about how we can create jobs in developing countries. What role do you see for clean technologies in creating jobs, especially in developing countries? And I think you already probably touched on something that could respond to that.
Absolutely. Clean technologies and renewable energies are not only for rich countries. And I would say that they are even the best leverage for developing countries to have access to more prosperity. Because the poorest countries in the world have to use foreign currencies to buy energy abroad, to import gas, coal, or oil, which is a disaster for the economy of the country. The only currencies they have to send abroad to take something that is not sustainable. Once the oil is burned, it's burned, you have no more. Imagine that we could help these countries to invest into renewable sources of energy, wind, solar, geothermia, hydropower, biomass. You create something that did not exist before. You create a development of local economy in the most remote places where there is no electric power line that brings electricity, sometimes even no hard roads. You help communities to have access to energy because they produce their own energy. They have access to new opportunities in business. They can have local industry. It helps for the food production. It helps for everything. And these technologies, in the 725 technologies that we have identified, a lot are also oriented on developing countries. For example, Covestro in Germany has a food dryer that is solar power activated, so the farmers can dry their harvest and keep them in order to sell them throughout the year instead of being obliged to sell them all at once for a cheap price.
So that's food security as well.
Food security, completely. Yeah. And energy efficiency also. When you have diesel generators that provide electricity for a village, can you imagine the cost compared to solar, wind, or hydropower? So and I'm sorry to be obliged to say that, but one of the big obstacles in developing countries is not the technology. It is the unreliability of some governments and the corruption of some governments. Because if there was more political honesty in some countries, there would be much more investment, because these investments would be completely profitable. But if half of the money flooding there goes in the pocket of some politicians, you have no investors for that. Investors are afraid, and it's normal that they're afraid.
I wish we had you've picked on a topic that I'd love to continue discussing, and I'm just conscious of the time. I just, maybe to give the counterbalance, if you recall, for example, the adoption of mobile technologies in Africa, completely leapfrogging the landline network. So there are possibilities, even when the political environment doesn't necessarily support investments in the traditional sense of the word, because there's no other substitute. But I wanted to close out this interview with a final word from you. Any advice? We've got leaders either speaking at this summit or who will be watching this summit. And I wanted to close out with a word of advice from you on how we work together to build back better.
Yes, maybe I will leave the technological field to go into the human field. There is something that is very encouraging today. It is the fact that if you are doing good, if you have compassion for your employees, for your suppliers, for your customers, you make better business. This is there are several studies in the US that have really shown that if you have a good heart, you make better money. And I think the time where you exploit people with very low salaries, with very high pollution to make more short-term money in your personal pocket starts to be over, because the population doesn't want that anymore. You have more and more initiatives everywhere to have clean companies, to have more fair and just transition. It is not just for the environment, it's also for the human beings. And the youth now wants to work in companies who have a positive impact, companies who are doing good for the planet. And this is a really good sign. That's a very encouraging sign.
Thank you so much, Bertrand, for that. Those encouraging words to close off this interview. Thank you so much for having joined us at the Good Trade Summit. Thank you so much for having contributed with such an enriching discussion. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Susanna in the studio. Susanna, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, and to Bertrand. That was really insightful. We loved hearing that doing good means better business, and it's possible to achieve these so-called unachievable, impossible goals. So thank you very much for that great kickoff conversation. We'll soon, after a quick break, head into our first panel of the day on the topic of maintaining momentum from COVID-19 recovery to a green transition. This session will be moderated by Carolyn Deere-Birkbeck, who's a senior researcher at the Graduate Institute and an associate fellow at the Hoffman Center for Sustainable Resource Economy at the Chatham House. First, we'd like to share with you a quick video about one of our free tools. It's called the Sustainability Map, and it's an online tool where producers and businesses can connect.
Hey guys, do you have any plans for the holidays?
Maybe my parents coming from Paris.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. What about you?
I'm going to Bolivia.
Ah, you're going to Bolivia. That's great.
It is. It's a long trip, but I'm going to arrive.
Hey, you. Yes, you. You get your coffee from the same place at the same time every morning. But where does your coffee come from before it reaches your cup? Let's trace this coffee's journey from the rolling hills near Kathmandu in Nepal, up these rocky, muddy roads, to this farm.
We started our coffee journey in 2008. What makes our coffee stand out is the origin. It's from the Himalayas and it's specialty grade coffee. And it's grown organically and it employs a lot of women.
The 500 farmers working with Kamoj Singh harvest and process coffee beans using green methods.
So our beans are basically, it's got a good acidity and the flavor is slightly sweet, fruity and nutty.
These organic specialty Arabica beans are sustainably grown and in demand, with global coffee exports rising in the past 20 years. Even for choosy customers, Kathmandu coffee fits the bill.
We've been able to grow very well in the local segment, but for the export market, we're still a small player, so we'd like to grow very big in the export industry.
But how could anyone find this 20-acre farm in the foothills of Nuwakot, 35 kilometers north of Kathmandu? Now there's a way. This farm and other small businesses are literally on the map, the International Trade Center's sustainability map, so buyers and retailers around the world can find them, try their products, work with them. That's how these coffee beans traveled halfway around the world to Geneva, Switzerland. This is about trade, good trade, connecting the unconnected, knowing where products come from, how they're grown, and who produces them. This is why trade matters. Join the Sustainability Map today.
Good afternoon, and on behalf of the International Trade Centre, I'd like to welcome you to panel 1 of the Good Trade Summit. I will be moderating our discussion on maintaining momentum from COVID-19 recovery to a green transition. My name is Carolyn Deere-Burbeck, and I work here in Geneva at the Graduate Institute and at Chatham House on promoting progress on trade and environmental sustainability. So I'm delighted to be here today with a wonderful set of speakers. So in recent months, the coronavirus has taken a huge toll on human lives, overwhelmed hospitals, emptied shops, and it's exposed the frailty of our value chains and our dependence on trade, both for imports of essential goods and food, and also for export revenue and employment. Now, the coronavirus pandemic is also intimately linked to wildlife trade. It's not only exposed the vulnerability of trade supply chains to unexpected shocks, it's also underscored the dangers of production and consumption practices that are misaligned with environmental protection goals. So at the same time this year, governments are grappling with how to transform the global economy so that it supports climate action, that it supports the conservation, sustainable use and restoration of nature, and that it reduces pollution. So policymakers, businesses and stakeholders alike are faced with dual challenges of how to support more resilient supply chains and also ones that promote sustainable production and consumption in line with SDG 12. And they need to think about how trade policy can support that goal. So in this first panel, we're aiming to lay the foundations for this summit by asking this wonderful, diverse set of speakers to present their perspectives on the nexus between trade and environmental sustainability. And in particular, we want to zoom in on value chains through the prism of environmental sustainability, which is a key ingredient for good trade. So some of the questions we want to explore are, with governments around the world focused on restarting their economies, how can we ensure that environmental concerns are integrated into their plans for recovery and for rebuilding trade? What are some of the lessons learned from the crisis from businesses about the importance of resilience in supply chains and also environmentally resilient supply chains? How can governments and companies work together to use this as an opportunity to reset and build more resilient, inclusive, and sustainable value chains? And where is green trade working? And how can it be scaled up? What's missing or holding back efforts to use trade and supply chains to support this shift to a more sustainable economy? So to help us work through these challenging questions, we have 4 speakers this morning. I'll run through each of them quickly now. The first is Jason Clay, who is the Senior Vice President of Markets and the Executive Director of the Markets Institute at the World Wildlife Fund in the United States. Now, Jason brings over 20 years of experience in trying to green supply chains around the world, working with leading companies in a number of different sectors, from soy, cotton, sugarcane, salmon, and a range of fisheries products. He's really been a leader in looking at how concretely companies can integrate more sustainability in production and in supply chains. We'll then turn to Mr. Peter Backer. He is the CEO of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. The WBCSD is a CEO-led organization of over 200 leading businesses. They represent a combined revenue of more than $8.5 trillion. And before joining the World Business Council, Mr. Backer was the CEO of TNT, one of the world's leading logistics and transport companies. We'll then turn to Madeleine Tuninga, who works for the Directorate General for Trade of the European Commission. She has an enormous portfolio, a very challenging one. She covers issues of the relationship between trade and labor, environment, sustainable development, and human rights. And she leads the Commission's work to integrate these considerations into the EU's trade policy. And she also works there on corporate social responsibility, responsible business conduct, and the SDGs. So we're really looking forward to her remarks. And then finally, we'll have Chai Mi, who is the Vice Chairwoman and CEO of the Pan Group, which is a leading Vietnamese agri-food company. She has spent much of her time in that role trying to look at ways to promote sustainability and sustainable development in their business practices. And we're really looking forward to hearing more from her too. So to get us started, I will turn the floor to Jason Clay. What we really like to learn from you, Jason, is some of your experience on what works in efforts to build more sustainable supply chains. How can companies become more resilient at the same time to crises like the pandemic and also to challenges like climate change? And how can we better support them in this effort? Jason, you have the floor. Jason, we can't hear you. Sorry. Thank you.
Sorry. I want to talk about a few things, but one of them is that whatever evolves out of the pandemic will not be the same as what existed before it. I think we have changed forever, as they say, and part of that change is that we will have to keep changing, and that's probably a very good thing, because with climate change, we're going to have to be much more responsive than we have in the past. But let me just offer a few observations and then get into what I see as some of the shifts that are starting to happen as a result of the pandemic that we need to think about going forward. The first thing that became really apparent was that it was really the loss of habitat and the increase in livestock production globally that created the conditions for zoonotic diseases like the pandemic. What we have found in our own studies is that we've had 2 zoonotic diseases per year for the last century. None of them have been quite as big as this, but as we begin to look at climate change and we see the impacts of climate change on crop production, where there are more pests and more other kinds of diseases, we're going to see the same thing related to humans. And I don't think we'd ever been aware of that really before. So we shouldn't forget that fact. Food system is definitely related to habitat loss, biodiversity loss, and the increase of use of land to produce food, but also the existence of livestock all over the planet. That is a given, and we need to figure out how to accommodate that as the world changes. But I think the other thing that the pandemic showed us is that, and that a lot of people probably had forgotten or don't think about very much, is that food is an essential service. Without food, we simply can't live. Without food, cities go crazy in just a week's time, etc. So what we have seen is really that the pandemic is a dress rehearsal for climate change. We're seeing rolling food shortages, rolling hunger, even some trade restrictions, but fortunately, I think not too many and not around some of the key traded commodities that are essential for food. And so we've also found that supply chains are extremely efficient at what they do, but they're also very brittle, and they tend to send signals one way. Producers, for the most part, in the restaurants and in food services couldn't sell their production. So when the markets are disrupted, it's critical that we keep producers whole and that product remain in pipelines, because it's very hard to start them up again from scratch. And so these are some of the kinds of issues that came up in the pandemic that we need to be aware of as we go into the impacts of climate change. What also became really important is that we leave no food behind. We can't afford to waste food during a crisis. People somewhere, either now or in the future, are going to need it. So when farmers can't produce their food, what we found on average was that they planted 30 to 50% less the next time. We can't have a world food system where people are producing less because they couldn't sell the food they produced the last time. So we've got to keep them whole. We've got to find a way to keep the pipelines moving. And if anything, maybe what we can do is store that food, buy it, make it shelf stable, etc. What we've seen in the pandemic also, though, is that companies have begun to work together with their producers to ensure that they have markets, but also with their competitors to even offload product that they have surplus of, or to search for other product from their competitors. That's the first time I've ever actually seen that happen at a large scale, where McDonald's is selling hamburger to retailers in Europe because their stores aren't open. And so these kinds of things started to become a little bit of the norm. That's the kind of behavior that we need to encourage going forward. We need buyers of product to have offtake agreements where they take everything that they've contracted, but they also take the surplus at a lower price, at maybe a spot price or at a cost price, and then are looking for other markets to sell that, to keep those suppliers moving, to keep those suppliers whole. So the key issues I think that we need to address going forward are food waste. We need markets for all food. Maybe we could use green bonds or food bonds, global food bonds or national food bonds to buy the excess food. During the pandemic, we have to figure out how to use stranded assets. That's going to be true with climate change as well. We found that there are 20 to 30% of global containers that are not being used. Could we use them to store shelf-stable food until it's needed, and then it's in an automatic shipping container that can go to wherever it's required around the world? We need to use cold storage that's not being used, kitchens, venues, even people. People are stranded assets during the pandemic, and that's probably going to be the case with climate change as well. How can we use them? How can we incorporate into the system? We've got to find ways to put stranded assets to good use. We even explored a pilot with the US Postal Service to create a farmer post where food would be delivered directly from farms to families without going through all the other intermediaries. But I don't think this is just about companies. It's also about governments and the need for governments to really step up and think differently. We've got to begin to look at how we can shift agricultural subsidies from paying for production to actually paying for saving food, to support regenerative, climate-smart agriculture. Agricultural subsidies globally are about $550 billion. Can we use that money to retire marginal land and reduce impacts, to increase productivity on the better land? Can we increase biodiversity and habitat in farming landscapes as a way to address some of these zoonotic diseases, as a way to put buffers between people and nature in a way that it had been up until recently? I think these are some of the issues that I'd like to tee up here. And in particular, can we get governments to really begin to think about this, retiring this marginal land and what the relationship of that is to carbon sequestration and carbon markets. And bringing carbon into farming is going to make it a much more sustainable venture in the long term. So let me stop there because I think I've used my time.
Great. Thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciated your last point, because I think in the wider trade policy discussion, one of the key issues at this point is how do we move beyond seeing trade and environment as a separate and distinct issue, but rather one that's mainstream throughout trade negotiations. And here, your suggestions about how can we look at agriculture through a more agricultural trade, through a more environmental lens, is really, really valuable. And this idea of how governments can begin to shift subsidies from production to more regenerative and climate smart agriculture seems like a really forward-looking proposal that we should all work further on. So I'd like to turn now to Peter.
If I could just add one more thing on that, because I think it relates to your comment, and that is it would be great to get governments to begin to focus on this. But in order to do that, the WTO is going to have to start looking at PPM and allow how product is produced to be differentiated in global trade. And that's a big hurdle that we've got to get over, I think. So that's going to be a big issue as we go forward.
Great. Thank you very much for putting that on the table. I think whether it relates to pollution or to nature or to climate, one of the big challenges we'll face going forward is that if we're going to transform the global economy towards greater sustainability, we're going to need to differentiate between products in terms of how they're produced, to the sustainability of production and consumption. And this is something that the trading system has struggled with thus far. How can we promote the products that are the ones we want to see on the markets and support transformation or transition away from those that are not sustainably produced in a way that's fair to all producers. So moving forward to Peter, what does, I have three interlinked questions for you. The first is what COVID-19 teaches us about the risks facing companies and supply chains in terms of resilience. And the second, what a green recovery would look like for companies, and how might they promote this in their supply chains? And then thirdly, going back to this point of trade policy, what kind of environment or enabling environment do they need in order to be able to push forward with their sustainability agenda? So Peter, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me. I've been slightly more than 8 years in this job. I've had 3 interactions with the system of the WTO, and every time I left disappointed because I couldn't get sustainability into the conversation. So if this can contribute to bringing sustainability on the agenda in the trade system, I'm happy to spend my time here. I think what COVID has done to the business community is not dissimilar to what it has done to all of us. It was a predictable shock to the system, and yet found many of us totally ill-prepared. Supply chains came to a halt, broke down. Like Jason said, took a long time to get restarted. And at the end of it all, will fundamentally change everything. In the first weeks, everybody was starting to talk about building back better. That language has all been scrapped now. We're now talking about building forward better, and we need to completely rethink. I think a couple of things that we've seen. A, we were ill-prepared, despite knowing the shock could come. And much bigger shocks, again, echoing Jason, are underway, whether it's nature loss, climate change, the growing inequality, and the risk of losing the license to operate for many businesses. Those are all shocks that we know will come. We need to get better prepared, i.e. resilience into the business models needs to be much improved. The second thing it has done is it has demonstrated to us the interconnectedness of everything. Now, the loss of nature leading to a pandemic, a health issue, leading to material inequality acceleration, because that's what we're seeing with the unemployment now raging around the world, leading to a view that if we want to build forward better, then we need to think about this as system transformations. It's not just integrating climate into trade. We need to fundamentally rethink systems. So the food system transformation is now a big topic. Jason knows a lot about it. The Food System Summit next year will give us some really good pointers. The energy system needs to now radically move to a net zero system. And so many systems need to change. But the one system that we really need to change is the economic system itself. And this is where I think the opportunity to integrate sustainability into the trade system emerges, because too much of the trade system to date is only focused on the economics of the matters at hand. And what I see happen now, and this is the conversation at this very moment in the corporate world, is we have ended the days of shareholder-centric capitalism. We are moving to stakeholder capitalism. And I'm not sure everybody on the call is familiar with those type of terms. So let me give a few insights what that means. Companies will be asked to disclose not just their financial performance, but their ESG performance, i.e. their environmental, social, and governance performance. Companies are being asked to show the externalities in their business models. So any damage one does to the environment will have to be paid. Carbon pricing is often the obvious one, but the same will start to apply for health damages that food may do, or benefits that we may create in the job market. And those changes will fundamentally lead to a revaluation of what is good performance, what is bad performance, will in the financial system lead to a revaluation of what is the cost of capital really. Is it just the strength of your balance sheet and your financials, or will we start to include these externalities? That reshaping of the economy, integrating environmental and social, not just in words, but in hard measurements, that will allow us to start differentiating in the trade system how we start to measure at product level how things are being produced and what the environmental and social benefits or damages are. I think that to me is the really big change that COVID will bring. We see everything change. The accounting rules will change. The fiduciary duty for boards will change. And at the end of the day, capital market valuations will change. What I would really like to do in this conversation and follow-up conversations with you and your colleagues is, how can we take that change in capitalism and copy it into the trade system? Because once we can begin to differentiate in the trade system, good from bad environmental performance, good from bad social impacts, then we really begin to move the world and the supply chains that cross through trade systems to a much better place. So that would be my introduction. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Peter. That's very inspiring. I think one of the key points you've made is that there's a lot of change going on within the business sector. I mean, I think also in the financial sector, in a way, something I have argued in the trade arena is the trade arena is being left behind. We're out of step with where the business sector is moving. And so part of it is working out, I mean, as on many other issues, how do we update the trade rules, the trade policies we have so that they're actually supporting and enabling the work that companies are trying to do, or at least the most forward-leading, looking companies are doing. So I think, part of that is working to understand what's going on domestically and in other parts of regulation, like around financial regulation. But we may also need to look, I think, in terms of helping countries make this transition, need to look at to ensure that we've got our development assistance, things like climate financing and trade assistance, are also supporting this on the other side, so that trade policy isn't in a vacuum, that it's part of a broader policy framework. And I would think that businesses here have a critical role to play in helping governments at the national level develop a more coherent approach to trade policy. So with this, I'd like to turn next to Madeleine Tuninga, Obviously, the EU has long been a leader on environmental sustainability and trade and trying to promote sustainable development in its trade policy. Most recently, we have the EU Green New Deal, and I think it's fair to say there's lots of interest in how the EU will take this forward in the trade policy arena. So it'd be great to hear from you about how you think that trade can contribute to a green COVID recovery plans. And how do you view the trade and environment interaction sort of post-COVID? Where should we be looking next and what could be done? Thank you, Madeleine, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, and thank you very much for inviting us to this. Green and sustainability is really top priority, both internally and externally. Needless to recall here that we've launched a Green Deal, a pretty all-encompassing pact that touches on all policy areas. I also wanted to highlight that I'm not going to give the crystal ball and the golden bullets. We are on all fronts really in full reflection. As you know, we've launched a trade policy review. We want to come out with a communication in January, and we can expect that there will be a very big emphasis on green. That said, maybe just a few words on COVID and how green needs to be plugged into that. I think overall, and that's what we heard here, I think in many ways, COVID has accelerated existing trends and issues we saw. That also means that if we look at the social impacts, what we can see from all the ILO reporting is a real exacerbation of pre-existing problems, big concerns, expansion of child labor, tensions on freedom of association. So there is, apart from the devastating social impact, in the field of environment that has been a little bit less immediate, and I think we are still digesting what has this meant in terms of taking our environmental agenda forward. There's quite a number of COPs this year. What I find very good is that both in the EU and you see it also abroad, that very quickly in the recovery discussions, people realize we need to have a green recovery. This is an opportunity to go for a green recovery and not go back to the old systems. In the end of the day, we're looking at the transformation of an economy. So that gives a lot of opportunities for us trade. Now, maybe moving a little bit to more trade aspects. I think that in COVID, we've been very, very busy with supply chains, and that hooks up with interesting remarks on the role of companies. So the supply, and in a way also how you look in terms of to the systems, because the supply chain follows something from A to Z from the whole production chain. But what is really nearly a game changer is the increasing role of business in sustainability. We learned that actually business that has embraced as a long-term strategy sustainability came better through the crisis and are better responding to it. You also see an acceleration in developments in, for the time being, most of the due diligence guidelines are voluntary. The EU is developing now mandatory legislation. So we're really in a game shift here in governments and business taking their role in changing this economy, this transitioning economy. Now, a lot of trades, I don't know what level of details and knowledge there is but there's a lot of trade tools that we use. The typical things we look at is liberalization of trading goods, services. There's lots of things on transparency, business conduct. We do a lot on the due diligence and responsible business conduct. We work with international organizations. So all these tools will certainly be used, and we even import, in a way, all the multilateral environmental agreements in our trade agreements, and the Paris Agreement, and so that is embedded in our trade agreements. I think the question will more be, how do you further implement that? I think that's one of them. But also probably looking at more innovative accompanying trade, actions to what you were describing, and these systems, or you can also say maybe applications or clean technologies. What can trade do for clean technologies? You're talking about investment, you're talking about services, you're talking about IPR. So there's a whole lot of things that and disciplines within trade that you need to bring together if you want to move on clean technologies. And then the additional challenges, of course, the enormous interaction with other policy fields. WTO, since there was a comment on it, yes, we are very keen on the WTO. We are also frustrated that we haven't been able to advance too much. We were very frustrated that we had to put a halt to the environmental goods agreement negotiation. And we are now, I don't know if you heard, but Commissioner Dombrovskis, who was just voted through the European Parliament as the new trade commissioner, he announced the climate initiative in trade and goods in the WTO. It's something we want to work on with our trading partners. Our idea would really be to look at what are the building blocks in the WTO and how can we work towards an ambitious outcome at the ministerial conference next year. And in that process, we certainly want to do a very good outreach and involvement with stakeholders. This is really an area where a lot is in movement, and there's a lot of thinking and intelligence out there that I think we need to inject in this process. I see you look at the time, so I'll stop here, but it is just too vast to put this in 5 minutes.
No, I completely appreciate it. It's a huge agenda, but thank you already for setting out some of the vision of DG Trade in this respect. What we'll do is we'll come back with some questions in a few minutes, but I'm just going to turn quickly to Tremi so that she can also inject her thoughts. Tremi, you bring to this panel really first-hand experience as a leader of a company trying to integrate sustainability into your operations. So it'll be useful to hear from you and how sustainability considerations can contribute to business growth, and how you've managed some of the challenges in terms of implementing that sustainability in your work. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for giving me a chance to say a few words about sustainability and how we recover the time of COVID-19. So at the PAN Group, sustainability is our core value. So we believe that sustainable development presents a positive and proactive approach to an unpredictable future. So Vietnam has advantage of containing an epidemic early and recovering quickly. As a result, Vietnam's economy will likely grow at 2% this year. So for the PAN Group, we are providing food security, food safety, and nutrition in a long-term strategy based on sustainable development goals. So we've grown organically and through the mergers and acquisition of outstanding business within our core competencies and along a value chain. So we produce a wide range of products like seeds, fish, shrimp, cashew, coffee, confectionery, and flowers. So we now export to more than 30 countries, and export account for more than 60% of our total revenue. We have about 100 million people living in Vietnam. So 60% this work in agriculture. So partly because of these natural factors, partly because of hard work and her people, Vietnam is now #1 exporter of cashew and pepper, and #2 exporter in coffee, and #3 exporter in rice. So I really want to share with you a story about our cashew business. So 5 years ago, when we acquired a company, it was struggling and had not seen profit for many years. So at that time, the company was most buying cashew, applying poor technology for some initial processing, then exporting cashew as a raw material at a very low price and without any brand name. So PAN looked at it as an opportunity. After bought the company, one of the first things we did was organize an organic cashew farming area. So this area would produce excellent raw material for processing, but rather than buying land, we enter into contract farming agreement with the existing landowner, so that the farmer could keep their land. So this is especially important because it's the best land for cashew farming is owned by minority family, often indigenous. Land is their greatest potential source of the long-term wealth, and for PAN, we take it from them would have been travesty. So instead, PAN provided this technology, finance, seed support farmers in this area. And by the cashew, they produce at a very stable price. And this allows many farmers improve their living standard without having to sub-vendors their greatest asset. So I think the finally we finished a cashew product ourselves, creating value-added product for consumer in the various markets. The high quality is resulting product has given access to many markets around the world, and now we're selling to Canada, Hong Kong, and United States, and very soon in EU. So profit after tax in 2019 compared to 2018 increased by 128%. And we received good news yesterday that for the third quarter of 2020, the profit increased by 30% compared to the same period of previous year. So this is very good news for our group. So I think that Vietnam had an advantage. We believe that the sustainable development presents a very positive, proactive approach to unpredictable future. So for us, the COVID is like a test that made our group evaluate itself, its immediate plans and its long-term ambitions. So we are calm, eager, confident, and ready for the challenges and opportunity to come. So for this and other reasons, so PAN is participating in EcoFair and an EEC funded project to promote trade in sustainable products from manufacturers in Vietnam on global scale. So ITC is our partner and in this and is supporting us with their technical platform connected through the test T4SD projects. Yeah, that's a story about cashew I want to share with you all. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. I mean, it's a great story about how the focus on sustainability and the long-term livelihoods of people is also one that contributes to profit in your company and to diversification of your trade. So that's a very useful example for us today. So I think what we will do now is go back to another round of questions. And as we move forward, if there's any comments that you have on the remarks that each other has made, you should feel free to do that. But first, I'll turn back to Jason and just to focus in a little bit more on some of your experiences of working to try and green supply chains, particularly by working with big brands. Back in 2010, you delivered a TED Talk entitled How Big Brands Can Help Save Biodiversity. And you highlighted the need for collaboration among companies in doing that. It'd be useful to hear a little bit more from you about how you think some of the biggest brands can help lead the way in supply chains, and also what that means for some of their relationship with some of the smaller and medium-sized companies that are probably listening to this call and who are keen to also participate in greener value chains.
Thank you. So I guess the short answer to the question is that I think that big brands can actually do a lot to support biodiversity and to support more sustainable production systems, but they can't do it by themselves. They've got to work together. And maybe most importantly, they've also got to move the bottom in their sectors, not just their competitors that are performing more or less at the same level with them. What we've found is that, in fact, by focusing on the best performers, we're actually getting marginal increases in performance. They're already doing a lot of good things, but the bottom 25% of producers in any sector produce about 50% of the impacts, but only about 10% of the product. So if we want to increase productivity and reduce impacts, we've got to focus on the bottom. And I think the onus for sectors is for the better actors to help shift the bottom, because the reputation of an entire sector is actually based on what the performance of the worst performers are and how that affects the average. So everybody is looking at global systems based on averages, and in fact we need to figure out how to move that to make it better. So the Global Salmon Initiative is a pre-competitive group that has actually made considerable progress working against key impacts, The better producers saw that if they didn't help the worst producers, it was going to affect the reputation of the entire industry. So they started working together. They've reduced fish meal use, fish oil use, feed conversion, those kinds of things. And now they're starting to take on greenhouse gas emissions as a group. How can they learn faster? By sharing information. That's pivotal. That is pre-competitive behavior at its best. I think that the animal protein sector and feeds have the most to gain by moving these average numbers. So in dairy, for example, the US and Europe have quite high performance levels. India and China don't. If you want to affect global dairy, you work with India and China to make them better. And we need to begin to start thinking that way. Global food, I want to make a few comments that maybe would stimulate some discussion later. In 2000, when I wrote a book on ag commodities, about 6% of food was traded globally. The FAO just announced that a third is traded globally today. That's just in 20 years. That is a huge difference as we see global trade. I think that I would agree with Peter that we need to look at new business models, but I think we need to look at new supply chain business models as well. We need to look at, one of the things I heard before the pandemic with the interviews I was doing with companies was that their biggest concern was they didn't think producers in their value chains could make a decent living. That was before the pandemic. Now it's even worse. And so I think we've got to find new models that have other benefits for producers. It won't just be about price, although it may be partly about price. It'll be about long-term contracts that can be used as an asset to borrow and make investments in more sustainable production. It'll be about equity or ESOPs or joint ventures or other kinds of ways to spread the wealth along the value chain, not just concentrate it at one end of it or another. Because if it's not working for everybody, it's not working. And we're starting to lose people. One of the things the pandemic showed us is that we can do without a few companies, a few retailers and brands. Their disappearance isn't going to change the food system. If we lose producers, we fundamentally don't have a food system. And so we've got to keep producers whole. We've got to find ways to do that. There's another issue that we've identified, which is that about half of globally traded food is not produced legally in the country of origin. That can be because of environmental issues like illegal deforestation. 80% plus of deforestation in Brazil is illegal. Or it can be because of social issues like slave labor, bonded labor, etc. But what we have found is that illegality tends to increase as resources are degraded. In a world with climate change, resources are going to be degraded. And so we've got to figure out how to address these illegality issues, social and environmental, and really include them in trade. And the biggest impediment to that right now is the traders themselves. They don't see how this fits within their business model. And that's where we all need to start thinking to figure out how we can incorporate ideas like this. One final note is that I think we have Codex Alimentarius to actually protect products through health and safety, phytosanitary kinds of conditions. Can we have a Codex Planetarius which addresses the 4 or 5 or 6 key environmental impacts of food production and verifies them through a trade system for global trade? Can it be worked in tandem with Codex Alimentarius? And so it becomes a thing that could be accepted as part of the WTO. All trade would have to comply with it, and we start really managing the planet as if it mattered, and it wasn't just up to each country or each business to do their own part. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jason, for a great set of proposals. And what I think I'll do now is turn actually just to Peter directly to ask him. You have had a project in the last few months called Vital Supply Chains in response to the COVID pandemic. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and its results in terms of building resilience and sustainability, and sort of what lessons it can teach us about how we engage with some of these local suppliers that Jason was talking about?
Yeah, no, thanks. Happy to do so. So we started indeed a COVID-19 response program that looked at three elements. What are the return to normal scenarios? How do we get employees back safely into offices and manufacturing plants? What are long-term resilience type of solutions that we need to consider? And the last one is the one that you asked about, is the vital supply chains that originally when we started it, looked at how do we avoid vital supply chains, particularly in the food system, from collapse during the COVID-19 crisis. But as these projects tend to do, it grew and it's become quite a big set of work streams for us. So we ended up with three work streams, three things that we looked at. The rapid response platform, and I'll talk a bit about it, collective action coalition, and the food system blueprint for recovery is being produced. I think the rapid response platform is probably the most relevant for the issues that Jason mentioned. So there we work together with a whole bunch of experts, companies, partners throughout the value chain to look at what are the major food system risks from COVID and share effective business actions to protect those supply chains. The work led to 7 principles of a strong response to guide effective, responsible, and sustainable business action. And maybe I'll list the 7. First one is to protect employees. Business, of course, initially is there to protect the health of its people, the families, but this includes the people in the supply chain. The second thing is build collective leadership and partnerships. So we need speed and scale if you want to reach all corners of the supply chain. Collaborating along the value chain with all the partners is key. The third one was enhance adaptability and flexibility. We need production facilities to be adaptable for the demand surges that will occur during shocks like this, particularly focused on the essential products. The fourth one was accelerate producer-focused responses. So farm-level disruptions are causing challenging issues, and businesses, and particularly the big businesses with which we work, have a responsibility to lead throughout the value chains. And that includes health guidance, equipment, but also financial support packages. That then led to how can we ensure continuous cash flow? So business should prioritize cash flow, obviously for their own health, but also to the farmers and the suppliers, recognizing that investments will be key to ensure supply chain continuity. Support relief efforts was number 6. So we have to ensure that throughout the supply chains, the reliefs were in place. And then the last but not least, building forward better. The responses needed to be aligned with food system recovery, leading into food system transformation ideas that can then be brought into the food system blueprint for recovery. So that comes back to the need to transform the system. So a lot of words, a lot of work, but there's a plan.
Great, thank you, Peter. I'm going to turn to Trami because when we spoke the other day, she also had some very interesting examples from the rice sector and also from the shrimp sector about some of the efforts that you've been undertaking to boost sustainability, and some of them mirror what Peter and Jason have been talking about, including, for example, in terms of the length of contracts and your long-term commitment to some of your suppliers. So you tell us a little bit more about how concretely you're trying to promote sustainability in those sectors as well.
Okay, thank you. I think it's better we take the stream business of our group as example. So this business employs 4,000 people, and 90 of whom belong to disadvantaged minority groups. And we have taken pains to hire most of these workers on full-time labor contract rather than as seasonal workers. This is good for our employees, especially in the time of COVID, because they receive full social and medical insurance benefits. It's good also for PAN because it gives us the ability to train and educate our workforce year-round, help to ensure the quality of our output. So since its acquisition, we have steadily worked to improve the hygiene of our aquaculture production system. We constantly improve technique to apply farming technology such as biofloc, recircumventing, and agricultural system to create a healthy breed, improve productivity, and reduce discharge into environment. So RAS reduced the need for water by 90-95% compared to conventional method. So over the few years, we have seen major profit, major payoff to own this effort. So thanks to the application of technology and good quality control, our product have been exported to Japan, UK, EU, and US, and have always sold with high quality, high price. At this year, in spite of COVID-19 outbreak, and also especially thanks to EVFTA, so the sale of our shrimp business in July and August 2020 made record at the highest level of the company has achieved in its 35 years of operation. So only August reached $23 million US. So I think that this year's shrimp business will be the most profitable in our group. So that is a very nice story. Is during the COVID, and we all faced a very big problem with also suppliers. So our CEO of the shrimp business called the buyer. Okay, we ready to reduce 2% for you. So this is the buyer is from Japan, and he really appreciate about the offer. He said, "Oh no, thank you." So we can overcome. So thank you so much. So this is say that we during the COVID we care for others. You know, first we care for our workers, for our shareholders, for our suppliers, our buyers. So it is a very it's kind of example. So another affiliate of our group should follow. So thank you. This is my example.
Great. No, thank you very much. It's useful to have the concrete experience from Vietnam and the work you're doing. I'm sure it will inspire some of the other companies and small businesses who are on the call. What I'll do in a minute is I'll turn to some questions from the floor. We've received 4, but before then I'd like to turn back to Madeline Tininga. You have had sort of the challenging role here because we've had you've told us actually about the exciting, I think it's been exciting news from the EU about the Climate and Trade Initiative and their determination to move forward with environmental negotiations on environmental goods that could help diffuse, for instance, carbon reducing technologies. And the EU has also been part of the efforts of the Friends of Advancing Sustainability in Trade at the WTO to reassert the importance of environmental sustainability at the WTO and hopefully to stimulate some more action-oriented dialogue among members. Now, today we've had some pretty forward-looking proposals, both from Peter and from Vanessa, about what needs to be done, both in terms of supporting new systems and ways of doing business that are more sustainable, in looking more sectorally at issues like agriculture, how do we really transform the sector? New proposals such as the Codex Planetarius, and then some of the work that Tran My has been talking about really depends on support from development agencies and so on. So what I am hearing is that there's a desire out there to move beyond looking at how we can ensure trade doesn't get in the way of environmental policy, moving even further beyond seeing them just as mutually supportive environmental and trade opportunities, but actually to looking how we can use the trading system to support and propel transformation in favor of environmental sustainability. So this is, it seems, where the future is really, really going. And so I guess the question is, what do you see as the way forward for the EU, and how can the EU help to promote the kind of multilateral dialogue that we need on those issues?
Again, 3 minutes is by far too short, and also because a lot is happening here. The Green Deal is, for the time being, a project announced by the Commission, containing lots and lots of measures. There's also a lot in food, from farm to fork. So a lot is in development internally, and I agree with you. We are not just sitting there to see how can trade ensure that all these measures are WTO compatible. Where it concerns internal measures, we have an international responsibility to see that this does not hamper actually the international developments and trade flows. But we are also certainly looking at how can we mutually be supportive. We have probably achieved a bit more bilaterally free trade agreements, because there we are used to basically import the multilateral environment agreements into our free trade agreement. So that has forced us over time to look at what is my role as trade to support this multilateral Paris Agreement, biodiversity, CITES and others. And in fact, we see a lot of process gains already. And probably this is one of the, in my explanation, WTO, where we have had difficulties to advance. The trade communities and the environment communities in most WTO members are separate entities. They work in silos. And our trade agreements have actually created a platform that these communities come together and have a means to engage with civil society. We did that with CETA in Canada. We had a climate initiative. So I think there's a lot of work to be done there in the thinking, how are these policies not competing, but supportive of each other. And that is, I mean, I'm not going to enter into agriculture and all the others, but in each of the areas that you mentioned, each of the Green Deal aspects have an external dimension, an incredible external dimension, all are part of the supply chain. And really our thinking has to be, how can we make this sustainable? It's actually the work that we want to kick off now, a bit more focused in the WTO. How can we integrate that? If you look at EGA, what we did in the end of the day, the Environmental Goods Agreement, we looked at the end user and we defined environmental products. There is criticism possible on that, because you may have a solar panel that on its way to become a solar panel is dirtier than another solar panel. And that brings us to the PPN discussion. So it is complex, but if at least we can start bridging these different concepts into a way of moving forward. And I think you're right in saying we need to look at more concepts. So is it an industrial model? It's circular economy. It's a model how you organize your economy, and how does trade then fit into that. So I'm not going to give you an immediate answer, but we are both in the bilateral and in the multilateral taking up on all of that. And we are happy to engage and continue to engage and look forward to your inputs.
Great, thank you very much, Madeleine. So I'm going to turn now to some questions that we've received from the floor. There are three, so I think what I'll do is I'll just read them out and then I'll turn to the panelists to consider them. So one of the questions is that many SMEs are shutting down and struggling simply to stay solvent in the context of COVID-19. So how can we push them to invest in new sustainability practices in these circumstances? And a related question, is there sufficient commitment from the international agencies, and I guess this also includes bilateral donors, to addressing sustainability variables as COVID-19 sort of exhausted their resources and interests in sustainability, or in fact, can we expect a renewed emphasis on sustainability? And then the third is, can the regulation of supply chains in consuming countries like in New Zealand and in the EU help to support action, or how can it support action in spurring more sustainable production also abroad? And then the final one is, in the wake of the EU Green Deal, what role can the EU play in trying to influence and inspire other major exporting countries to make their production more sustainable? So how can the EU play a leadership role in bringing others on board? So I might start on those. I will put Jason and then Peter on the spot. See if you could take any of those questions.
So just a couple of comments. I mean, one of the things that I read with Note recently was that capital flight out of developing countries during the pandemic was huge. In fact, that's what was maintaining much of the US stock exchange. So what has happened is that the multilaterals have stepped in to buoy those economies and keep inflation from getting out of hand and cover basic running costs. But it means that there isn't a whole lot of money left over to run some of these other issues and to focus on sustainability. So I think that's a very real issue. I don't know if this comment actually answers a question or not, but it seems to me that we have to be very careful going forward when change is happening so fastly that we're not trying to drive by looking out our rearview mirror. We need to be looking forward. We need to be solving the problems that are coming, not the ones that already exist, because many of those are going to disappear based on what is happening going forward. So let's solve the next problem where a little bit of money, a little bit of anticipation can help us move much more quickly. I would just cite that we have seen the first crop of soybeans produced in permafrost in Russia. Think about what that means from a global trade point of view, about where crops are going to be produced in the future and what the environmental impacts of that are going to be. We've got to start anticipating these major shifts. Let me just stop there. Give other people some time.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Peter.
No, the question on SMEs maybe. Strange enough, the challenge for big companies is not even that different from small companies, because most big companies are subject to shareholders, listing requirements and all that. And it's often very hard to get the transition that is required from the current business models to sustainable business models sold to shareholders. But on the SMEs, I think there are two avenues to get involved in these changes. One is indeed recognizing that most SMEs are part of larger supply chains, and those supply chains will become more sustainable. But very concretely, for those interested on the call, ICC has launched, I think 2 weeks ago now, what I call an SME hub, initially mainly focused around climate change, but that's a resource that is available to all SMEs in the world, because in the ICC, I think there's 48 million companies. So many small and mid-sized companies will be part of that. A resource for SME companies to get involved in the climate action.
Thank you, Peter. Chami, I'll turn to you next. Did you have a response to this, perhaps to the question of how can we push SMEs to invest in new sustainability practices? What would they need in order to be able to afford or to be inspired to push more sustainability in their businesses?
Okay, it's correct. The COVID-19 has broken supply chain, changed consumer habit, and made flexible logistic and distribution channel from more necessary than ever. So I think that reality in Vietnam during the pandemic showed that the closure of restaurant and street food shop and have removed many manufacturers and professors and processors from the market. This create temporary artificial redundancies of input, but lack of output for consumers. So imbalances in circulation of goods affect the cost, quality, and purchasing preferences. A consumer, especially in product directly related to their health. More than over, consumer will prefer products that are traceable, healthy, fresh, well-researched, and with no additives. In addition, they will give more priority to using local products. So I think in the COVID world, so PAN and our subsidiary will seek to make a supply chain both more robust and critically shorter. So take a nut business, for example. So why we do produce some raw material, some raw cashew for processing locally. That local volume is not sufficient to meet our demand. And so we have to import a large quantity from Africa. So one solution would be to increase local cashew production so that PAN is less dependent on import. But another solution is actually to create a cashew processing factory in Africa, for example, because we import a lot of cashew from Africa. So this kind of duplication will make us robust against future crises that threaten shipping. So, so I think that if we need the support from government, from Vietnam, to how to invest to the overseas, or we have also support from the where we going to invest in. So it is really excellent to do for this. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much, Tony. I just turn lastly to Madeleine, and then we'll turn to wrapping up in just a few minutes. So Madeleine, you're going to have the last word. You're on mute. Sorry.
I will unmute. I think I first want to thank you a lot for this conversation. I'm very happy that we have a representative from Vietnam with us, and I found it a pity that Costa Rica was not there. In fact, I think these are two countries that are really big friends, both bilaterally, and with Costa Rica we've also worked a lot in the WTO. But in the context of Central America, it's a good example of what we're doing on integration of sustainability. We work also a lot on due diligence and have very interesting projects. And with Vietnam, we are now starting an exciting new journey. We've worked already on a tremendous labor reform with Vietnam, but we also see that in the field of environment, whether we're talking deforestation, whether we're talking climate, or where we are talking due diligence, Vietnam has taken up and worked with the OECD and reached out to take up in legislation due diligence requirements. So I think it's a good example to show what we can do with sustainability, and we are now on the eve of, I think, really pretty radically having to change these policy interactions. I would leave it at that, but I really look forward to continue to working with you, and certainly also the ITC, the host. We do a lot of things with you. SMEs is a good example. You've been doing a lot of work there. And I think if there's one thing with SMEs that will be critical in the development of all these standards that will be either formal standards or business requirements, we have a mapping exercise with the ITC. You have a tremendous database for that. And that will become even more important to streamline and make information accessible to SMEs.
Great, thank you very much, Madeleine. I think whilst, of course, I don't work at the ITC, I think that they play a critical role. They're a critical part of this puzzle, because if we're going to support sustainability across supply chains and more sustainable production in developing countries, we will need a commitment to working with them through aid for trade, through greener aid for trade, through trade finance, and finding ways to promote trade finance that supports sustainability as well. So I think this integration of development, environment, and trade policy making will be really critical. So I've given the buzz that we have 2.5 minutes to go. So just to close, with some closing, a sense of what we've gathered, what we've learned today. Of course, it's been a very rich discussion, but I think there have been 3 points in which we've touched upon. First is on recovery, that the crisis presents an opportunity for a shift towards a more sustainable economy, and that we must seize it as to promote that shift. It's a chance to invest in more sustainable, innovative, and inclusive value chains, and also an opportunity to rethink production and consumption patterns. We've really heard today about the role of business, the role business can play in promoting sustainability across supply chains, and this idea that in a way business is out in front. Peter's talked to us about stakeholder capitalism. Madeleine has talked about the efforts going on nationally and regionally around policies like due diligence, and working with other countries to help them move sustainability forward. So I think part of the challenge going forward is to listen more to business about what they're already doing and what they need, and how they can be supported by policymakers and by trade policy. And then moving to that last point on trade policy, Madeleine has really underscored the importance of engaging business in these discussions. And I think here we also, as we're talking to an ITC audience, we really need to think about how we can engage small and medium businesses also in thinking about how to make trade policy work and support their efforts to promote sustainability and more sustainable value chains. Overall, I think we've heard about this idea that we need to promote mutual supportiveness of trade and environment, but also to move beyond that, to see how we can really use trade policy and trade to spur more sustainability across supply chains. We're looking for systemic changes at this point towards greater circularity, to a more low carbon economy. And that means really looking across trade policies and rules to how all of them can help support a move towards greater sustainability. So with that, it's time for me to close. I would just like to thank all of our participants for such rich contributions. I really wish we could have this conversation again, and I hope that we will. I know that ITC looks forward to continuing engaging with many of you in their work going forward. And I'd like to thank the panel and the participants too for listening in and for the questions you posed. We're now going to stop for a short 5-minute break, during which I encourage all of you to use the online platform for networking. So, sorry, it's a 12-minute break. So thank you all very, very much again, and thank you again to our panelists.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon.
Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good time of networking and were able to stretch your legs just a little bit. We're now going to head into our second panel, looking at women and trade at the heart of the pandemic recovery. And this session will be moderated by Her Excellency Athalaya Molokome, who's the ambassador of Botswana to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva. But first, we're very pleased to hear from Deputy Executive Director of UN Women, Ms. Anita Batia, who will help set the scene for this discussion.
On behalf of UN Women, let me thank ITC for this opportunity to address the 2020 Good Trade Summit. At the outset, let me congratulate the ITC for the launch of the SheTrades platform, as well as for the work that it has been doing to lead an international consultative process to come up with the standardized definition of woman-owned businesses. Both of these initiatives are very welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now offer a few reflections on the interlinkages between trade and gender. We know that trade is not gender neutral. Global trading systems and global trading value chains reflect deep underlying structural gender inequalities. Women participate in the global trading system as employees, employers, consumers, suppliers, distributors. And in all of their participation, the structural gender inequalities in society and economy are reflected. What that means in very practical terms is that women occupy the worst paid jobs, have the least amount of social protection, and are the first to lose jobs. All of this existed before the pandemic, and the pandemic has just made things a lot worse for women. So as we seek to build back better, we must apply a gender lens to thinking about fiscal and monetary stimuli, as well as the global trading system. We ask policymakers to take a gender lens to both the design and implementation of stimulus packages, and as the global trading system reopens, supply chains build back, we ask that there is intentional thinking about the impact on women. Ladies and gentlemen, every crisis presents an opportunity. This is no different. We have an opportunity to build a more just, equitable, and gender equal trading system. Let us seize that opportunity. UN Women stands ready to partner with ITC to make that happen. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. As has been indicated, my name is Athalaya Molokome, ambassador and permanent representative of Botswana to the UN at Geneva. I'm a gender champion and a member of the IGC Global Board. I'm pleased to extend to all participants a very warm welcome to this panel, the second on the first day of the Good Trade Summit organized by the International Trade Center and held under the theme Women and Trade at the Heart of the Pandemic Recovery. Let me take this opportunity to introduce and warmly welcome our 5 distinguished panelists. Due to time constraints, I must apologize that I'm not able to do justice to their impressive bios, but do recommend that you look them up on the summary document for this summit. I will begin with Amanda Brooks, CBE, who hasn't been able to join us yet, but she will be coming on. She's Director General, Interim Trade Relations and Implementation Department for International Trade, or DIT, in the United Kingdom. Ms. Brooks' responsibility include bilateral trade relationships, multilateral fora on trade, such as the WTO, G7, G20, Commonwealth, among others. Dr. Thoraya Obaid is our second panelist. She's chair of Women 20 and has recently been appointed as a member of the independent panel for the pandemic preparedness response. She has a long career in the United Nations where she served in various roles, including executive director of the United Nations Population Fund. Our third panelist is Eduardo Martinez, president of the UPS Foundation and chief diversity and inclusion officer at UPS. He is responsible for the operations and management of its global operations, investing into over 4,300 organizations serving in over 170 countries around the world. Our fourth panelist, Monica Musonda, she's the founder and CEO of Java Foods Limited. a Zambian food processing company that provides affordable nutrition to the Southern African market. She's a recipient of the 2017 African Agribusiness Entrepreneur of the Year Award and the 2013 World Economic Forum Young Global Leader. Last but not least, Senator Honorable Paula Gopi-Scone, Minister of Trade and Industry, Trinidad and Tobago. She was reappointed Minister of Trade and Industry in August 2020 and has previously served as Minister of Foreign Affairs. She aims to continue efforts to improve the export capacity of the local manufacturing sector and position Trinidad and Tobago as the business and trade hub of the Caribbean. Following these introductions, let me make some very quick remarks by way of opening. Many of you will know that while COVID-19 has adversely affected everyone, all of us, its impact has not been the same everywhere. Most importantly, to the subject of this discussion, its impact has not been the same on the gender relations between us, so that it's not gender neutral. So any response measures that are not gender sensitive or gender responsive are likely to worsen the already existing inequalities. I think the gender inequalities are well known, but they deserve repeating very quickly, just to remind us that they've been with us for a very long time, much too long. They include women's limited access to productive resources, low wages, unpredictable incomes from the informal sector, limited participation in decision-making, to name only a few. We have recently learned from an ITC SheTrades survey in May 2020 that women are more likely to work in sectors that have shut down since the COVID-19 crisis began. This includes tourism and hospitality. We also know that women in developing countries particularly face far worse inequalities in society. For instance, statistics show that 95% of women in South Asia, 89% in Sub-Saharan Africa, and 59% in Latin America are in informal and insecure jobs, subsistence farming, seasonal workers, and domestic work. It is true to say that despite some progress being made towards the achievement of gender equality in some areas over recent decades, the empowerment of women in the field of trade and economic empowerment has lagged behind. This is the result of both gender stereotyping and a limited appreciation of the interlinkages between trade, gender, and development. Some have erroneously claimed that trade was gender neutral. I think we all know that that is not the case, because the reality of socioeconomic standing of women in society is not reflective of this. In the context of the WTO here in Geneva, we have learned that some development issues such as trade and gender have largely been left out of discussions on development. Attempts to raise gender equality issues have often been caught in the wider and systemic dynamics of the WTO negotiations. In essence, women's economic empowerment has customarily not been considered an issue that could be driven through trade policy tools. So we decided to do something about it in the context and build up to the 11th WTO Ministerial Conference held in Buenos Aires, Argentina, in December 2017. The Trade Impact Group of the International Gender Champions motivated discussions around trade, gender, and development, which led to the development of a non-binding draft declaration on trade and women's economic empowerment, otherwise known as the Buenos Aires Declaration. This declaration sought to remove barriers to and foster women's economic empowerment in order to help them reach their full potential in global trade. The Ministerial Conference provided an opportunity to build awareness on how trade and gender are key to ensuring inclusive development. In other words, the adoption of the declaration at MC11 was a watershed moment that served to close the gap that exists in the trade field. The declaration was supported by 118 countries in Buenos Aires, and with continued advocacy, I'm happy to say the number of countries supporting the declaration has increased to 127, which is 77% of the 164 WTO members. The declaration consequently puts gender equality on the agenda of the multilateral trading system and commits its signatories to, and I quote, collaborate on making their trade and development policies more gender responsive. We have used the declaration here in Geneva to move the agenda forward, and I won't go into any details because that would take too much time. I would say that there has been an impact of the adoption of this declaration, because as part of the implementation of the declaration, we have pleasantly learned through WTO research that information provided by 111 WTO members as part of their TPR reviews TPRs, as they are called, trade policy reviews, from 2014 to 2018, about 70% had integrated women's empowerment in their national or regional trade strategy. This is obviously good news, and we are very pleased by that. Of course, this is progress on the part of a diversity of WTO members. We commend it, but it is equally important to acknowledge that much more remains to be done to close the gender gaps. We have done work on the declaration. We have a publication that is expected to be launched later in 2020. This is us working with ITC and Iceland. The reports include information exchange and the seminars held in the past 2 years, including policy recommendations and best practices shared to operationalize the economic empowerment of women by policymakers. We trust and hope that the report can contribute to global discussions on trade and gender. More recently, we have agreed to put together an informal working group in the context of the WTO, which marks the next phase of the initiative we started in 2017. Now, to come to the subject of today, I just want to recall a webinar that was organized by the International Gender Champions at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, around April 2020, focusing on gender equality in the context of the epidemic, just as it was starting, the global COVID-19 pandemic. It was observed, and I quote, that we are already witnessing the critical yet undervalued role women play in mitigating the impact of this global pandemic on our communities and the disproportionate negative impact on them. At the front lines of the health response and community service provision, many women are without basic protective equipment and their voices are not being heard. They are also victims of a surge in domestic violence under quarantine measures, an increased care burden as schools shut, and greater financial insecurity, unquote. This was in April, at the beginning of the epidemic. I think our panel today dovetails rather well with these sentiments. And quite frankly, I think this is a very good basis on which we can move forward to say, this is what we saw or thought in April. Where are we now? This is why I'm very pleased and confident that with a variety of experiences that our distinguished panelists are bringing, we will have fruitful, practical, and solution-oriented discussions on the immediate COVID-19 relief measures taken so far, the longer-term recovery strategies and considerations across various sectors of society that respond to the unique challenges facing women today. I will start with Dr. Thoraya Obeid, because I see that I don't think that we have, has Amanda arrived? Yes, she has. Hello, I already introduced you. Welcome very much.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I was marginally late clicking the join button, so forgive me, but I've been here and heard your excellent introduction, so thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Welcome. And then I'll start with you, because that was the plan. And I'll start with the first question, which is what immediate response mechanisms the UK has adopted so far to ensure recovery strategies consider gender issues?
Well, firstly, thanks very much for inviting me to join you today and for bringing together a really interesting panel. I'm really looking forward to hearing from everybody else, but also a fantastic audience who I'm sure will have some interesting and insightful questions for us all to reflect on as we go through this session. One thing, as you've already said, that we all know is that women have often been the first responders to the COVID-19 crisis. And we also know that we will be the backbone of the recovery efforts in our societies and our communities. We're clear in the UK that we can only build back better and create a more equal, inclusive economic recovery if women are empowered to act and lead. The UK has and is playing a leading role in the COVID-19 international response. We fully recognise the need to build an inclusive and global coalition to deliver this, and we're using the full range of our policy tools, whether trade, development, diplomatic, national security, or prosperity, to do precisely that. So far, as you may know, the UK has pledged over £1 billion worth of aid to counter the health, humanitarian and economic risks, and to support the global effort to find a vaccine, including £150 million to the Catastrophe Containment and Relief Fund to provide the poorest countries with debt relief on payments to the IMF. We've also doubled our £2.2 billion loan to the Poverty Reduction and Growth Trust, which provides concessional financing for the poorest countries. And with UK support, the multilateral development banks and making over $200 billion of financing available to governments over 15 months. This really will help prevent the poorest countries, which represent a quarter of the population, from collapse, and by supporting their economies and access to skills and education. Economic disruption hits the world's poor the most and will deepen a global recession and will make it harder for us all to bounce back and prosper. We've also looked really carefully at the COVID impact study that the SheTrades Commonwealth programme has undertaken, and to look at what the evidence is telling us. It's highlighting two particular needs for female-owned businesses. These are access to finance, particularly urgent to address cash flow problems, and digital marketing and e-commerce support to help reach new customers and generate sales. I'm pleased to say that SheTrades Commonwealth was able to immediately pivot to support female entrepreneurs with training on digital literacy and on e-commerce, and has developed and delivered a crisis management toolkit, which is helping women-owned businesses build further resilience. Pivoting and responding through programs like SheTrades is just one part of what we're doing. But we know we still need to take steps to ensure that COVID-19 does not exacerbate inequalities that already exist. Around the world, women and girls are seeing their rights and freedoms rolled back by this crisis. This impact will be particularly acute for those living in poverty-hit communities and fragile countries. It's why we're working with our international partners to put women and girls' rights at the heart of our response and ensure no one is left behind. We're working with our G7 and G20 partners to support developing countries facing the health, economic and global shocks and social shocks, of COVID-19, including by securing funding commitments and leading the development of an ambitious and wide-ranging G20 action plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing those response mechanisms, and of course to the UK government for the very substantial contributions that you are making to the poorest of the poor in many of our countries. Let me then move on to Dr. Thoraya, if you allow me to call you that. 25 years ago, we had Beijing, the Beijing conference. I was there, it was very exciting. And I think at the time we were thinking, well, 25 years from now, things are going to be very different. Now, this is the 25-year mark, we've reached that. The Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action has been around for 25 years, but obviously there's growing concern that as an immediate consequence of the pandemic, global gender-based inequality will increase. How do you see the effect of coronavirus on the role of women in society? And will it reverse the existing progress made on gender equality, or are we just being pessimistic?
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. You can call me plain Thoraya. And thank you for inviting the W20 to be part of this panel. Yes, the Beijing Platform of Action is also accompanied now by the Sustainable Development Goals, and they are really complementary in a number of ways. And the Sustainable Development Goals has targets, and it requires member states to present reports, so it's even we can monitor the changes that are taking place. However, a study by the World Economic Forum indicates, and this is really shocking, Madam Ambassador, it would take 200 years to achieve the 2030 SDG 5 target on the empowerment of women because of the slow pace of implementation by governments. On top of that, we have COVID, which has really threatened the advances that have been achieved and actually made all inequalities, including gender equality, glare us straight at our faces. But if there is a silver lining to a pandemic, it is the discovery, and I put discovery between two quotations. The world discovered that women are the backbone of the response efforts, for they constitute 70% of the global health workforce and 76% of the unpaid caregivers globally. So fighting the pandemic would not have been possible without women. They must recognize that for their strategic and life-saving work, meaning the frontline workers and so on, must be recognized for their strategic and life-saving work and responsibilities, not only in terms of ensuring they have the PPEs, etc., but in terms of pay and benefits that correspond to the significant services they are providing. Reversing this trend is possible through many actions by governments, private sector, and civil society, if we all work together. To ensure that the recovery, the most important maybe intervention is to ensure that the recovery is based on inclusiveness. The principle of inclusiveness and diversity and rights. These are the three key words that have been repeated not only with W20, but across all the G20 structures. So inclusiveness and assurance that there will be equitable participation of women in the economic activity, and the recognition that this participation will bring resilience to the societies. Now, W20 has carried over the principle of inclusion from previous W20 consensus in three areas: labor inclusion, financial inclusion, and digital inclusion. One of these sectors, each of these sectors is impacted negatively by the absence of women, and at the same time, if these sectors do not use gender lens with regard to the work that has been done and services provided, they hamper the integration of women in the formal work and as entrepreneurs. And it's particularly critical in the informal sector, where there is need to provide women with necessary support, formalizing its presence so that women and men and young people who are in this informal sector would benefit from the services that are available to the formal sector. In the financial inclusion in particular, women, the financial businesses, they address women who are literate and who have big businesses. However, there are financial instruments that women in the informal sector or the small and medium-sized enterprises don't know how to deal with it. And so there is a requirement to address the needs of small and medium enterprises and self-employed women through the simplification of such financial instruments and facilitating the access to the financial services. Another point, Madam Chair, is the importance of social protection for them, for the whole sector, as well as affordable and good quality services for women who work, because they have to take care of their children, the elderly, the sick. All the caretaking responsibility is falling on women. And as a result, during COVID, they either have to leave work or they have to take care of these responsibilities. So there is a demand by W20 and other working groups asking for a package of social protection, including care, to alleviate the responsibility of care from women, as well as sharing home responsibility within the members of the family. There is another area, Madam Chair, which is the area of technology, which women, especially women in societies that are not well integrated, there is an issue of access to education that is based on technology and economy and services. But to do that, we have realized also, and we have seen it during this COVID reaction, when all of us are linked to each other with the Zooms and so on, there are areas that do not even have connectivity. So we're asking that the connectivity of internet to be spread across countries to the digitally excluded communities. Another area that is very important right now is the area of women in STEM education. Women, this is an area where women need to be promoted to enter it in order and to open training and career roads. We have noticed in our research that even where women are parts who have qualified in the whole area of technology in particular, AI, etc., they are not used as their skills to produce these applications are not used, and there is more emphasis on women as users rather than as producers of technology. But we are entering into a world of technology as we are doing right now. So this is an area where also women need to be given attention. The gender lens, to apply a gender lens to measure all these areas, unless there is gender analysis by disaggregated data by sex and age, I think the picture will not be very clear. And so one of our demands is to ensure that there is disaggregated data collection by various institutions in order to be able to plan well. And the final point I'll make here, Madam Chair, is that in the W20 this year, we have added 2 pillars that were not there before. One is entrepreneurship as a cross-cutting issue to all of this, as well as inclusion in decision-making, as I said. And the third one is accountability by the G20 leaders for decisions that they are going to make. This is a summary of where we are in dealing with COVID and beyond COVID.
Thank you very much, Soraya. Very comprehensive summary indeed, and I believe very practical, concrete, data-based, research-based, which I think really is what we need to be able to say, how do we come in and build back better in a way that doesn't leave women behind. I think this takes us to my third panelist, to whom I'm going to address a question in the logistical field. Eduardo, can you share with us the experience of UPS in operating during the pandemic? How have logistic disruptions impacted women entrepreneurs?
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for the question. Good afternoon, esteemed guests, ministers. It is a pleasure to be with our HUE and our partner, International Trade Center. I believe that I represent the private sector on this panel. And I do want to underscore 2 points that my previous colleagues have raised. First is that women are the cornerstone of every community. As operations that we have in over 220 countries and territories, we see that when disaster strikes, when civil discourse occurs, when war and economic depression occurs, women are the ones left behind to care for their neighbors, to care for their families, and to care for their children. So we do see it every day that women are the cornerstone of every community in the world. The other point that's been made is the importance of public-private partnerships. We believe that that is the singular way to advance our sustainable development goals and, in fact, to work our way out of this pandemic. Is for the public and private sector, for civil society, for the UN system to work together in order to overcome the challenges before us. For UPS, we are a supply chain transportation company, but we're also a community and people company. We have over 500,000 employees, as I said, that live and work in over 220 countries and territories. So these are our communities too. And this pandemic has impacted just about every corner of the world. So I'll take you back to early January when the pandemic began in China. UPS and the UPS Foundation mobilized with our UN partners, UNICEF, the World Food Program, UNHCR, UNDRR, UN Women. We mobilized with those organizations as well as INGOs to move forward and to take protective PPE equipment into China and other parts of the world. Since that time, we deployed a 4-pronged strategy to address food security, financial stability, education, and in fact, healthcare. We mobilized our people. You see, as a private sector company, we have employees that want to make a difference in their communities as well. So we mobilized our people in these communities to engage with local community-based organizations in order to understand what the needs are in their specific community. So we have made connections with over 1,400 nonprofit and NGO organizations across 60 countries, addressing those issues regarding food security and financial stability. And of course, education, because as we know, educational systems have been shut down. Women and their children have been left behind to care for them, to give them the educational foundation that these children will need into the future. So we mobilized our workforce. And I say these as examples of what private sector companies can do when in collaboration with the UN system, with partners like the International Trade Center and all of my esteemed guests and panelists. I believe that private sector company, as do we, need to play to their strengths. For us, supply chain, transportation, being in communities around the world, mobilizing our people to be engaged with their neighbors is something that most companies can do everywhere in the world. So we implore and work with chambers of commerce. We work with organizations like the International Trade Center to tap into the reservoir strength in the private sector and to have them engage. I will say that in many ways, as I go around different sectors of the community and talk about mobilization of the private sector, sometimes the private sector doesn't know how to engage with the UN system or with their community-based organizations. So I think that that is something that we can all work on, is to have ways that we can embrace other segments of our community. So with that, I will pause. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so very much for coming up with that private sector view and also underlining the importance of partnerships between the private sector. And what really struck me about what you said is how you describe your employees at UPS. It's not only us public servants. Sometimes we think we're the only people that are working for the people. The private sector also would like to make a difference to the lives of their communities. And I'm very grateful that you have shared that in this panel. Let me go to Monica Musonda, entrepreneur. Can you share with us, Monica, some of the challenges that you face as a woman entrepreneur operating during the pandemic? What advice would you give SMEs regarding shocks, crisis preparedness, if one can ever be prepared?
Sure. Thank you very much for having me. I live in Lusaka, Zambia, and I am really this woman entrepreneur you're talking about. My experiences are very much what all other women in other countries have been experiencing during this public health pandemic. I think when it first started, we were unsure really about how long it was going to be around, to what extent it was going to affect our businesses, our way of life. But what happened, well, what we saw very clearly is that many of our stakeholders and our governments very quickly acted. And what we saw in Southern Africa, at least, was a closing of borders, what they're calling lockdowns, encouragement of working from home, closing of schools, really limiting gatherings. Now, as you say, many women, not just myself, work in sectors which were directly affected by lockdown measures. And this meant really asking the question, well, we weren't sure, were we locked down only for a week? Or was this going to be finished by Friday? Were we going to be back able to generate capital to pay for our commitments, our leases, our employees? But as we know, a day then became a week, then became months. And for many women, the issue has been how they can keep their businesses going in this, what they're calling a new normal. So many of the challenges have been, for instance, how do you continue to operate in an environment which has greatly changed? How do you continue to pay your commitments? As you know, there's some of us who have gotten loans from banking and financial institutions, and immediately not many banks will yet willing to have a discussion about changing terms. Of course, they too were unsure how long the pandemic would go on for and the impact on businesses. But you still had to make an interest payment. You still had to pay back your debt. How were you then going to pay for your lease if you were renting property? How were you going to pay for your employees, the very people who make your businesses run? But if you had no income coming in because you were in a sector that was directly affected by lockdown measures, it became a crisis for many of us women entrepreneurs. Another big one, and we've heard about what supply chains have done. What we saw in Southern Africa was, because we were landlocked in Zambia, a lot of our input or supplies coming into the country were delayed or actually stopped because it was uncertain how they were going to come in the country. We had no air travel. A lot of the goods were coming in by road. The borders were closed. So for myself, I'm a food manufacturer, many of my inputs could not come into the country until 2 months later, when there was a government negotiation to allow services and goods to come through road borders. But for 2 months, it was very difficult to operate and continue to operate. And what that meant for many of us in Africa was we saw huge depreciation of currencies. And this definitely has impacts on the cost of goods and the cost of services. And we are still feeling the impact of depreciation of currencies and the end product. And a very difficult time for all consumers when every week or every month you're seeing products go up, particularly when you are unable to generate capital to look after yourself. And this is very, very much the case for many women. I'm not able to work and therefore generate money to look after my family, but around me, goods are going up. And this is the crisis or some of the challenges we've been faced with here in Africa. I think there have been a lot of learnings. I think it's the first major pandemic that we have witnessed. And I think all the stakeholders have learned and are continuing to learn how to adapt and adjust to some of the crisis that we've been faced with. I think for my advice for many of the SMEs is really now to have what they're calling business continuity planning. It's something we had never really looked into, but now it's something you have to continually ask yourself, if this happens, how can I negotiate myself out of it? How can I negotiate with my supplier to deliver at a later date or deliver half of the consignment? And these are real practical issues. I mean, before you would not have gotten paid until you delivered the whole consignment. But now you're really looking for advice or support for women entrepreneurs to have more flexible arrangements around supply agreements, better contractual terms, even on financing. I mean, it's really great to see now that people are coming to the party with softer terms for financing. However, a lot more needs to be done than just saying money is available. It has to be on terms which make it much easier for women to access the finance, make it easier. We're still in a crisis, so you've got to understand that payback will still take some time. So you have to be a little bit more flexible, allow the entrepreneur to actually recover from the pandemic. Very happy to hear this discussion about digital, really important now. It's another market. Before, perhaps it was not at the forefront, but now really encouraging other SMEs, women-run and led businesses to think of this other market that is out there, the use of digital, and really look around how you can reskill or tool up and use the digital space, because it's really a space which is available to us, and obviously maybe at a fraction of the cost, but we really need to know how to use it better. I think we have to realize there will be crises, maybe not as large as this pandemic, and really prepare ourselves to pivot, if I can say that, to allow for your business to change, perhaps sooner than you think, to look at other products and services. For myself, I had an instant noodle brand which was doing very well with school children. Schools closed in March. We pivoted to make a nutritional cereal, which is something a lot of the international NGOs were looking to distribute around the stressed communities. And it was something a year ago I didn't look at as an opportunity. So really another thing I would really encourage SMEs to look at what else they can do within their business scope, whether they're providing a service or a good, what else can you do given the constraints? What else can I do to raise capital? What else can I do to pay bills? Because that's what you want. You're really looking at survival. But I really thank you for the opportunity to discuss the real issues around what COVID has meant for women-run businesses. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. Very practical. We should thank you for the very practical, personalized experiences. And I think it really links to what our earlier speakers said about how women are at the forefront and that support is needed. You represent an example of such a woman who is an entrepreneur, and you are telling us how you responded and how in future others can go about responding. My next speaker will be Senator the Honorable Paula Kopiskon. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I'll just call you Honorable Senator, if I may.
That's fine.
I would like you to come in now with the government perspective to share with us your government, Trinidad and Tobago government, strategies to ensure a gender-focused recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 pandemic. I'm sorry, the number was kind of looking funny.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chairperson. And to ensure that Trinidad and Tobago not only recovers from COVID-19, but also builds a new economy and a new society, the government appointed a roadmap to recovery team filled with the country's most prominent business leaders, politicians, public officers. And the focus is on three main pillars: transforming the economy, making food security a reality, and leaving no one behind, making equity and empathy central. COVID-19 has already caused unprecedented changes to the daily lives and livelihoods of many. It has created significant human suffering and will require the continued implementation of robust safety net to cushion the impact of those who lack the resources to survive. Plans have been formulated to achieve more targeted interventions and is seen as a social investment and not simply as transfers. The investment is in the vision of leaving no one behind, the social stability that will be necessary during a very trying recovery period, the human capital needed for building self-reliance among vulnerable persons, protecting the position of women and children in the society, creating gender equality and equity, and ensuring that aggregate demand does not fall below the level required for steady growth. So priority is given to reviewing the extensive food support program to ensure that no one in the country is going without food, providing funding to women and other vulnerable persons who have become unemployed or lost their livelihood temporarily as a result of COVID-19 mitigation measures, providing incentives to businesses to develop initiatives that create sustainable employment for vulnerable groups, and establishing support to the building and maintenance of existing families and homes for at-risk youth and women, working with civil society to foster enabling environments that build the ability and capacity of women to help themselves and their children and their families and transition them to a point of self-sustainability. For Trinidad and Tobago, the way forward post-COVID is to continue building a digital economy. Over the last 10 years, the government has embarked on an e-government initiative, TT BizLink, which is a secure, user-friendly online interface that gives businesses and individuals 24/7 access to applications for government's trade and business services and allow for efficiency in obtaining these services. The ministry is currently also implementing a national e-commerce strategy, and for our country, COVID-19 has unwittingly served as a catalyst for e-commerce activity for both businesses and consumers. And since the pandemic, there has been an uptick in e-commerce activity, particularly as it relates to the local private sector. More online services are now offered, and those with an online presence have intensified their marketing and advertising. Smaller businesses have begun to intensify their activities via popular platforms as Facebook and Instagram, WhatsApp, and so on. And as we move forward post-COVID, the government will ensure, as far as possible, that businesses have the necessary tools and resources to adjust their business models to ensure that they derive tangible benefits from e-commerce and to put businesses in a position to come out stronger post-pandemic. In collaboration with one of our companies, Export TT, the National Export Facilitation Organization will launch the National SheTrades Hub on October 20th of this year. And with the ITC's aim to connect over 3 million women worldwide by 2021, there's no doubt that our female entrepreneurs will benefit from this suite of training and networking opportunities presented by the initiative. And we do, in fact, look forward to that. Of course, we are also looking at further developing our creative sector where many of our women are employed, and we are focusing on film, on fashion, and on music. And through all of these various initiatives, many artists, many women involved in fashion and the development of the film industry as well, have been able to capitalize and to showcase their talent throughout the country and internationally. Our focus would be on growing these industries, which number of women participate in. I thank you.
Thank you so very much, Senator. We are very pleased to hear of those interventions from your government and your reminder, and I think it was mentioned by other panelists earlier, that there is a silver lining here. The technology, the digital space and so on, that now we need to support women to be able to access technology and so on, so they can move to other areas and other ways of working and living, which will move their families forward. I'm going to go to the second set of questions, and this time I will be asking my panelists to just give me a very brief sort of snapshot. The next two, I'll start with you, Amanda. I know that you've shared with us the UK perspective and interventions in this field to make sure that economic recovery is supported and is gender responsive and so on. But I thought maybe you can just give us in a minute or so the priorities of the UK to ensure that trade policy supports, first of all, women, and secondly, developing countries. I know you said something about this, but you might just want to wrap it up by way of highlighting very specifically.
Very happy to, and I'm going to try and rise to your challenge on timelines as well. I just wanted to say how fascinating everybody else's contributions have been, but also just how powerful that testimony from Monica was as a lived experience, both in terms of what she's learned and how she's changed her business so quickly, was incredible to hear. On a personal level, I have spent more time worrying about my business continuity plans in the last 6 months than I have in the rest of my career, and you see me sitting working from my home, so as part of that. In terms of the trade policy tools, we're trying to take a really holistic approach in the UK to this, and at the beginning, Madam Chairwoman, you said very clearly how we're beginning to see some of that bear fruit in lots of different fora inside the WTO. We've been incredibly proud to work with you and all those other countries who have been part of the work following up the Buenos Aires Declaration. Seeing those flow through into how people are reporting in their trade policy reviews is fantastic, and we are keen to support and encourage others, firstly to sign up to the declaration, but also to kind of begin to mainstream those tools across their own work. And it's something we have done in the UK, for example, when we last published our export strategy back in 2018. We'd made some really specific commitments on how we were thinking about trade and gender in how we provide our support to female entrepreneurs who were seeking to export. And that was, a really important shift for us. I wanted to mention one other thing, which is about our free trade agreement programme. Any of you who have been watching the UK's creation of its independent trading voice will not have failed to notice that we are very focused on our FTA programme. And we've made a very clear commitment that we want to explore through our FTA negotiations how we can pursue trade and gender more clearly. That's been in our public objectives that we have published for our trade negotiations, and obviously those discussions are now live and ongoing, but which are really important to us. So I'm going to stop there, but WTO, FTAs, but actually the mainstream activity in the UK in terms of what we're doing in terms of our practical help, all are part of our toolkit.
Thank you so very much. I'm pleased to hear you really making those concrete, tangible connections between what your government is doing and what is happening here in the multilateral trading system. And thank you very much for committing to continuing to do so. Dr. Toraya, I'm also going to be moving to you in terms of prioritization. And I know once again that you took us through the many interesting interventions that W20 is doing, and how you see data and research supporting the response going forward. But a coordinated multilateral response to COVID-19, of course, is urgently needed. What, in your view, are the priorities, in your experience, that W20 has identified? Dr. Thoraya, I think you're still muted. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that what we have been facing in terms of multilateralism is a weakening of the system, and ambassadors like yourself and others really need to take that challenge of how do we re-strengthen multilateralism again so it can be supportive to the various change processes that are being put in place to face the corona. I'll give just a couple of examples where multilateralism or organizations have been influential in providing, in guiding or helping us at W20. One example is very concrete. ITC and UPS supported W20 by through studies and so on that were really critical in identifying lots of the issues that we have mentioned already, and we're very grateful. That kind of support of multilateral or of private sector organizations and multilateral system to processes of negotiations is really important. Another, and this is very concrete, the W20 are calling on the ratification. I don't know if people know about it. It's the ratification of the ILO Convention 2025 on workers with family responsibilities, because that is an area that COVID have shown, and I think all of us have seen how women were torn between their work and their family responsibility. It's ratification, it's number 156, and we are calling for ratification by 2025, this convention. So that's one very critical that will help women in businesses and in private sector. Another recommendation is very critical that involves calling on OECD and ILO to continue reporting annually to the G20 leaders who made commitment in 2015 to something called the Brisbane target of 25 by 25, which is basically decreasing the gender gap in the workforce by 25% by 2025. So monitoring that change and reporting back is very critical as well in order to know where we are and what needs to be done. And there is a recommendation, very specific recommendation by the 20 calling on OECD to provide comparable sex disaggregating G20 data to establish baseline, measure progress, and report on gender equality related commitments that are found in the G20 commitments, declarations, and so on, and leveraging multilateral frameworks such as the SDG to use that for reporting purposes to complement or not to add pressure on the G20 countries, but to have them use existing reporting mechanisms to show where they are in terms of this whole agenda of empowering women as post-COVID in the various sectors that we have mentioned. I will stop here.
Thank you very much. Multilateralism, yes, we need to keep, our energies insisting, because that is the only way forward. I agree with you, and I'm happy that W20 is making those recommendations and demands, because it's important that it be coming from civil society as well, who work very much with the grassroots. Eduardo, I'm going to ask you about sort of very direct ways, perhaps, in which your company, UPS, has acted to support women entrepreneurship and their ability to operate during the pandemic. Once again, I know you said a few things about this earlier with your employees and so on, but if there are any other ways, concrete ways in which you have assisted, supported women, we'd be very happy to hear from you. I think you're still muted. This is always tricky.
Yes.
There we go.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for the question. And that really brings the partnership with the International Trade Center, SheTrades, and to the centerpiece of our work today. Now, we know that communities around the world are in different places in confronting COVID. We are fighting COVID. We are in some communities advancing towards recovery, and in other communities, we are still struggling to fight COVID. UPS is meeting communities where they are in that fight. However, we are seeing the opportunity to continue launching a program with ITC, the International Trade Center, that we launched several years ago. Diversity and inclusion is a core value of UPS. I can say that as Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer. And women are a key stakeholder in our efforts around the world. And we partnered with ITC to leverage our strength in trade and in business and couple those with ITC's strength and their networks throughout the world in order to build the capacity of women entrepreneurs. So we have began to start using that partnership once again, and we have had workshops as we speak. We have launched a program in India. We have had workshops together in Vietnam, Mexico, Spain, and we look forward to continuing to have these workshops that today have impacted over 700 women entrepreneurs in 79 countries. And these workshops are geared to give women entrepreneurs the ability to ship their goods. My colleague from Trinidad and Tobago said there's been an explosion of e-commerce and online ordering. We are seeing that ourselves, as many of the goods that people are ordering throughout the world are being delivered via online ordering, being delivered to their homes and residential areas. So I believe that there's a huge opportunity for women entrepreneurs to continue to grow through this e-commerce phenomenon that unfortunately is being increased by the situation that we're in with COVID. So I will pause there, but it really has brought the centerpiece of our programming with ITC to the forefront.
That's excellent. I'm sure ITC will be delighted to hear this. They have their work cut out for them. We find that the ITC is a great partner in these very kind of practical, concrete interventions. Monica, I'm going to grab a question from the floor and combine it with the question I'm going to ask you, which is what, in your opinion, should be the key components of support packages for small and medium enterprises, in particular women-owned SMEs? I know that you also have some expectations and ideas on what global buyers and government could do to empower SMEs. So it is not just a question, a general question, but also something very concrete, which we'll be hoping to hear from you. The audience is also very interested, yes.
So thank you very much. Let me start off with my comments on what governments can do, that very key stakeholder in this time. I think what we have seen definitely is a government's realization in building local capacity, which includes women-led and women-run businesses. I think the pandemic exposed that we're not doing enough to support local, and we have seen definitely on the African continent a lot of governments coming forward with what they're calling stimulus packages. What I would be asking governments to do much more is engage with industry players, with associations to understand, really understand how these stimulus packages can actually work for the better for women-run businesses. I mean, as I said, it's great to throw money at a problem, but if it's very difficult for women-led or run businesses to access the money, we're not solving a problem. So we really want a simplified mechanism to support women-run businesses through financing during this time, not just financing, but things like training. I think if I can speak from the food business perspective, what we found is that many businesses lacked food safety experience, which has now become a very key issue, particularly if you're looking at the region as your market. You will not be able to export if you don't have certain food safety certification. So this is something actually very easily solved with partners to ensure that women-run businesses are able to access the correct training to really scale up their knowledge and how they produce safe food, not only for their own country, but for the region as well. Another thing we'll look and we really ask governments to think about is their procurement rules. It's actually a really low barrier in which women can access larger contracts. Governments can allocate a certain percentage of certain contracts to women, particularly where they know women in sectors where women have been largely disadvantaged by COVID, whether it's the hospitality, food sectors, try to see how they can funnel some of the money they're getting from lots of partners around the world to these businesses, really help grow these businesses. And what we're seeing on the continent now is a huge discussion about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, really important for us to understand the benefits of, and it's been talked about previously about multilateralism, really important now that we're no longer talking about a country-specific role, how we can impact our own country, but how we can impact our continent. So again, what I would love to see from government is a clear roadmap about how this will come into play, how we can benefit from becoming a regional player, how we can grow to be a regional player through access to linkages. With respect to global buyers, it's not just about global buyers, even regional buyers. I mean, in Southern Africa, very well linked, but could be better linked. I would love to have a buyer understand what the buyer wants in Botswana, in Malawi, to really look at how we can service ourselves first, and then the global market. But we'd like to see transparent rules about that. So there isn't sort of preferences, or if I can use the word, non-tariff barriers where your goods are kept out because your good comes from a particular country because there's a doubt on the standards, but really try to see that how they can help certain goods and services coming out of, which are coming out from women-run businesses. And then lastly, I think I've spoken about the financing. So I think those are some of the things we would really like to see to empower SMEs, particularly led by women. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Monica, because you actually have addressed a question that also was coming from the audience on how women-owned SMEs in developing countries are excluded from decision-making in the public sector and policies affecting their businesses. What you are saying is that you would like to be included, you would like to be consulted, so that the solutions take into account your lived experiences. And I'm pleased that you referred to the Continental Agreement, the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. We have the SADC, we have SACU, and so on, our various, our East African community, ECOWAS, and so on. So I think for Africa, you are correct. We need to begin at home and increase intra-African trade through the ACFTA and make sure that we take advantage of this new and normal, as you call it, the issue of training and so on. I'm quite pleased. You had certain points about what governments can do. And I think that I'm going to be a little bit unfair on our Senator, the Honorable Paula. If you can come in here, because Monica did say a few things which I'm sure are applicable not only in Zambia or in Africa, in Southern Africa, but also globally, just so that I can hear from you, Senator, what measures governments can take to better empower women in trade. And I know this is a big, wide question, but some of the things that have been said might just help us get a little bit more concrete from you, how you see governments can move forward in this area. Senator.
Good. Yeah, thank you very much. So I spoke earlier about building a digital economy, and indeed the crisis has to be used as a critical impetus for countries, particularly small developing countries, to begin unlocking the potential of digital technology to quickly change its way of doing business. So countries, I said, especially small developing states, have to now invest in an enabling digital environment, which will provide the foundation to the creation of a fully digital economy and for doing trade online. Another factor, improving the ease of doing business. Governments must work to remove all of the bureaucratic bottlenecks that negatively impact competitiveness and productivity. For example, in Trinidad and Tobago, the single electronic window. Through this system, the government is pursuing several initiatives, implementing electronic funds transfer, which will allow all payments to government, such as taxes and customs duty, to be made electronically. Also automating all government services where practicable. Also enhancing cooperation between stakeholders to modernize, to upgrade, and to automate all of the import and export producers to reduce the time and cost associated with the importation and export of goods. It's also a must that governments offer financial support and incentives to ensure the survival of existing businesses, as well as to encourage the proliferation of new business ventures as well. And this can take the form of tax credits in all sectors of the economy, encourage angel investing in particular sectors deemed instrumental in transforming the economy, direct financial support, supporting research and development, subsidies, grants, co-financing facilities, and someone talked earlier about certification. We are going to embark in Trinidad and Tobago on a substantial certification offering to particularly all SMEs to ensure that they in fact comply with international standards so that our goods can in fact move outward and compete in the international arena. And I spoke a little bit about the creative industry before, and it's very important that we move to get women more involved in manufacturing and also in the creative sector. In fact, any area where women are skilled, and it is all about monetizing anything that you are able to do well. And it may be a simple item that you can cook well. And it is that it can be properly packaged, it can be certified, it can be exported to international markets. So for women, the central theme that I want to leave is to monetize anything that you do well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. I'll remember that. Monetize something that you do well. Because, and I know you mentioned the example of cooking, it could be making anything. And I think that thinking in those monetary terms is an excellent tip. I'm going to suggest that we pause for about 5 minutes, take a break for about 5 minutes. But I will, when I come back, just before I summarize, maybe I should even ask you now, if you would like, if there's anything, a burning point that any of you panelists would have wanted to make, I would not want you to leave this panel without having said it. And I'm quite happy to give each one of you half a minute to do so. You want to say something, Ms. Brooks?
Thank you. I'm mostly stuck at monetize, and I'm definitely confirming I won't be going into a cooking business. But I think the thing that really struck me was just the commonality of the very different perspectives, of the focus on our need to really drive out some of the opportunity that exists in this terrible situation. You know, how can we make the most of e-commerce? How do we help people women who are running their own businesses grow into different markets, whether that's local, regional, or global? And I think e-commerce just has such a big opportunity for us all. But as many others have said, standards and certification is absolutely critical to that. So thank you. It's been a great session. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Korea? You're on mute.
Two words other than monetize. It's inclusion and accountability. Inclusion, and holding whoever, government, private sector, whoever, accountable for decisions made. I think these two have to go together.
Thank you very much. Inclusion. Can we have Eduardo? You want to come in?
Yes. Thank you again for this opportunity, and thank you to my panelists and to you, Madam Ambassador. I would say that I would encourage women entrepreneurs, all those that are supporting this conference, to continue to persevere and to continue to build your resilience to withstand shocks like this to the economic infrastructure. And I do think that we can leverage, that if there's one silver lining, that we can leverage doing business online. Trade brings us together. Let's continue to try to monetize your talents in order to advance our world forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Monica.
Yes, just really quickly to say that we shouldn't let COVID win. I think there's been a lot of great momentum over the years, and thank you for all the parties who have done so much to get women this far, but we cannot stop now. We must continue to support women entrepreneurs, to support our governments understand the issues around what women go through to grow businesses and some of the struggles and challenges we're going through now. But we can get through this. We must get through it. Our lives depend on it. But thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Monica. We won't let COVID win. Senator.
Good. So I think for women, we must develop a posture of confidence and the drive to survive through these difficult times. Look for the opportunities, monetize, get on the SheTrades platform and find yourself in a place in the international trading arena.
Thank you very much, Senator. I'm actually going to change course now because I think we are moving in a direction with time where we need to wrap up. So I won't take a break. I will move immediately to summarize. Just start off by thanking our fantastic panel. I was so captivated by everything that you were saying that I didn't see the time reach through so quickly, which is why I thought we had time for a break, and we don't. But that's fantastic because the brain works best when it keeps going. So thank you very, very much to all 5 of you, and I am hoping that we can continue to engage beyond this through the ITC, who are such a good connect. And I'd like to thank the ITC in particular for organizing this and for inviting all of you to come and share your perspectives. I think a few points, quick ones that came through. For me, as an ambassador based here in Geneva, I found it extremely beneficial. And what I learned from the discussion is that what we discussed today gives me some ideas in terms of how we can advance the implementation of the Buenos Aires Declaration by advancing at this level, the global level, connecting to the regional and then to the domestic or the national, the mainstreaming of gender issues and the critical role of trade policies, and further establishing linkages between discussions at the multilateral level, as I said, with policymakers and takers, users at the national level. The need for countries to apply a gender lens on the impact of COVID-19 across all sectors. Silver linings, we must take advantage of these. Then we can help establish benchmarks, measure objectives, and achieve our development imperatives. Because the 2 things are not separate, they go together. Countries clearly need to invest in creating an enabling environment to benefit from digital trade and e-commerce. I had many of you speak about how the whole idea of technology and digitization has become important, reskilling and retooling to build capacities of entrepreneurs. You referred to that, and to take up opportunities in the digital space. The multiplier effect of public-private partnerships, I think from UPS, it became very clear that an engaged private sector partner like UPS and others, we need more of them to explore ways to make them work better and to have greater reach and impact. So I'd like to applaud you, UPS in particular, for being the private sector voice in this panel. I've already talked about what huge opportunities I learned from you come out of digital connectivity, but that we need to invest in making sure that there is access in this regard. I think we've heard about the African Continental Free Trade Area, and I'm sure there are other regional agreements that we could refer to in this regard. But it's been a very rich discussion, a discussion that, as I said, I'm sure we'll be carrying forward. And I would like once again to thank the ITC, our listeners, our participants. I know we had many of you, and I'm really, really pleased that you sent some of the questions that you sent. I'm sorry that we tended to sort of summarize them without, if you didn't hear your question being asked in the way that you placed it, it's because we were trying to put the questions in sort of blocks. And if your question didn't come out and you were not answered, please forgive us. I'm sure that there will be another opportunity for you to ask this question in the very different ways in which we are all connected all over the world. And I think with that, I would once again thank you, everybody who's listening, everybody who's participated, and say that the session has come to an end. Thank you. Merci. Good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
In Zambia and the Gambia, a unique interconnected partnership is working for female business owners, from fashion designers to investors, from farmers to government officials. This movement is helping small businesses started by women take off. These businesses are the backbone of developing economies, but they also need support. Support such as guidance on developing a handbag collection or creating a business plan, attending a trade fair, or ensuring buyers for harvests. SheTrades in the Gambia and Zambia is doing just that, supported by the Enhanced Integrated Framework.
Connecting women to knowledge and networks is the first step in changing their lives. The COVID-19 crisis has shown us that connections are vital to the resilience of businesses, especially women-owned businesses. We partner with ITC on initiatives like SheTrades, which foster connections for women to trade.
That video featured our work with our partner, the Enhanced Integrated Framework, and we also heard a statement from EIF Deputy Executive Director, Ms. Annette Mwemba, for her statement, and we thank her for that. We are partnering with EIF in the Gambia and Zambia and across the world. Now for our closing keynote address, we have the honor of welcoming Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who is the former president of Liberia, and she was also the first woman to be elected head of state in an African country. She received a Nobel Peace Prize in 2011, which recognized her efforts to promote peace and further women's rights. So we welcome her address now.
This summit is timely as the COVID-19 pandemic presents us with a rare opportunity to rethink the status quo, reset, and rebuild more sustainable, inclusive, and resilient economies. As president of Liberia, in 2014, when the Ebola virus disease hit West Africa, more than 11,000 people were killed. Supply chains and other cross-border trade were heavily disrupted, leading to restrictions on movements, goods, and services. There are a number of striking parallels between both health crises and a number of lessons learned which can help inform and accelerate our current recovery. We learned that health crises are not gender neutral, and thus our recovery and response measures need to address and reflect this. Confinement exacerbates domestic violence against women. In addition, women are held back from schools and the workplace and may never return. They have weaker social protection and safety nets, for example, because they are often employed in the informal sector. What are the implications for governments? We will not be able to successfully fight the pandemic unless our communities are also on board. We need to build community trust and buy-in so that they are first responders and effectively exchange information with regards to contact tracing. As such, we need to work with communities to ensure girls have the same opportunities as boys to continue their education. That within the households, women are not forced to forsake their jobs or their businesses. That workers in essential services, predominantly women, are as protected and valued in economic terms. If this does not happen, there is a very real risk that gender equality could be set back for decades. Trade is an essential element of the global cooperation agenda. In the midst of one of the largest global recessions since the Great Depression, we need to get the economy back on track. Trade has opened significant opportunities for women. In West Africa, from cashew nuts to fashion, from IT to food products, women have tapped into regional and global markets. We need to ensure that we defend our open and rule-based trading system, a system that ensures a level playing field for small and large players from across the globe. For this reason, under my leadership, Liberia joined the World Trade Organization. But we also need to define what good trade is, define our ambition in terms of sustainable and inclusive trade, and put in place a roadmap to get there. Women and women-owned businesses should be placed at the center of our recovery effort, and it is in our economic interest to do so. It is estimated that promoting gender equality in response to this crisis could add $13 billion to global GDP by 2030 compared to a gender regressive scenario. Women-led businesses with adequate and proper support can play a major role in the economic recovery and in job creation. Women leaders have led effective country response, and women leaderships have been essential to our recovery efforts on the front lines of the crisis, as nurses, doctors, and ministers of health, but also as teachers, scientists, engineers, and caregivers. International cooperation and global solidarity is critical to our recovery. During the Ebola outbreak, countries generously provided financial, logistical, and human resources, which were instrumental in surmounting the crisis. However, unlike Ebola, this pandemic knows no borders, and the same countries who provided generous support are also battling COVID-19. Cooperation is thus even more important now to ensure that people in countries with fewer resources also have access to treatments and vaccinations. We must remember that no one is safe until everyone is safe.
Thank you to Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf for that statement. As she's a women's empowerment champ, we really appreciate your message for that. And thank you to all of you, our speakers and participants, for joining us today on day one. We have some statistics from today's session. We had more than 1,000 participants from more than 80 countries, as well as more than 2,000 meeting communications already happening in the last few hours. But it's not over yet. The day two will begin tomorrow, and actually now we will begin the networking. So many of you are already in discussions about that, and we're glad to see that. For those of you who haven't done that yet, all you have to do is on this Umbrella platform, if you look to the left-hand column, you'll see something called People. And in that tab, you can see all the profiles that have been registered on the platform for the summit, and you can request 15-minute networking slots either this evening or this afternoon, wherever you are, and also for tomorrow. They'll be open all day during the summit times. So be sure to start networking if you haven't already, and join us again tomorrow at 2 p.m. Central European Time, which is the same time that we started today. And that will be our second and final day of this summit. You can't miss it. We're going to have really interesting sessions. We're going to be having discussions about how to build back better for the people and economy, just as we started today. And we'll also look at the role of technology, which we touched upon in this last session. We're looking at blockchain, and we'll have speakers from IBM, L'Oreal, as well as other executives, entrepreneurs, and high-level officials. So have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are around the world. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 2 p.m. and happy networking on behalf of all of us here at the International Trade Center.